My son looked me dead in the eye at his daughter's sweet 16 and told me I was an embarrassment to his high society friends. He shoved a crumpled $100 bill into my worn jacket and told me to use the service exit. I did not yell. I did not cause a scene. I simply walked out to my rusty pickup truck, pulled out my phone, and froze the very accounts funding his luxurious life. Before I tell you exactly how I made him lose everything, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe that arrogance should always come with a heavy price tag. My name is Gideon. I am 69 years old, and what happened that night was the beginning of the most ruthless lesson a father could ever teach a son. I turned the ignition off, letting the engine of my 1998 Ford pickup sputter and cough before finally dying out. The silence that followed was heavy. I sat in the driver's seat looking out through the smudged windshield at the sprawling estate of the Oak Ridge Country Club. The valet parking line was a parade of European engineering, sleek black luxury sedans, shining silver sports cars, and vehicles that cost more than a family home. And then there was my truck. Faded navy blue paint peeling at the edges, a massive dent in the rear bumper, and a faint squeak in the suspension that announced my arrival long before I ever pulled up. I felt the eyes of the valet attendants on me. They wore crisp white shirts and black bow ties, whispering to each other as I stepped out of the cabin. My heavy boots crunched against the pristine gravel. I was wearing my best suit, a gray two-piece I had bought over a decade ago. It was clean ironed and pressed, but next to the tailored Italian fabrics walking past me, I looked exactly like what they thought I was. An old, tired, working-class black man who had somehow taken a wrong turn and ended up at an exclusive event. The cool evening breeze carried the sound of a string quartet playing from the grand ballroom, mixing with the clinking of champagne glasses and polite, hollow laughter. This was my granddaughter Aaliyah's sweet 16, a milestone meant for family. But standing there in the shadow of so much borrowed wealth, I had never felt more completely out of place in my entire life. I ran my calloused hand along the rusted hood of the Ford. Tyson, my son, absolutely hated this truck. He had spent the last 5 years begging me to send it to a junkyard, calling it a public eyesore and a testament to poverty. What he refused to understand was that this piece of metal was not just a vehicle, it was a monument. 30 years ago, my late wife Lorraine and I scraped together every spare dollar we had from working double shifts just to buy it secondhand. We used this very truck to haul our first renovation materials, flipping a rundown duplex that became the foundation of everything we built later. Lorraine loved this truck. When the cancer took her, she made me promise to never let Tyson forget the value of hard work. She told me to test him to see if the boy we raised still had a soul beneath all that modern greed. She knew what he was becoming. I drove this truck to remind myself of where I came from and to honor the woman who helped me build an empire in total silence. I walked up the grand marble steps toward the main entrance, holding a small, carefully wrapped gift box for Aaliyah. Before I could even reach the brass handles, a figure stepped into my path, blocking the doorway entirely. It was Courtney, my daughter-in-law. She wore an emerald green gown that easily cost more than a few months of my supposed pension. Her blonde hair was styled flawlessly, but her face twisted into a mask of pure panic the moment she recognized me. "What are you doing here at the front entrance?" she hissed, her voice a sharp, venomous whisper. "The delivery door is around the back." I looked at her, my expression perfectly flat. "I am not a delivery driver, Courtney. I am here for my granddaughter." She grabbed my arm, her manicured nails digging into my jacket sleeve, and pulled me forcefully toward a side corridor away from the glittering lobby. Before I could demand her to release me, a heavy hand grabbed my other shoulder. It was Tyson. He wore a midnight blue tuxedo, a silver watch catching the light. His eyes darted around frantically, checking if any of his business associates had seen us together. He dragged me further down the service hallway, pushing me near the kitchen, swinging doors where the smell of expensive catering hung thick in the air. "Are you out of your mind?" Tyson gritted through his teeth, his face flushed with anger. "Look at you. You showed up to the most important networking event of my year, driving that piece of junk and wearing a suit that smells like a thrift store." "I just came to see Aaliyah cut her cake," I said, keeping my voice steady, refusing to match his hysteria. "No, you came to ruin my image," he snapped. "Do you know who is out there? Investors, corporate executives, people who think I come from a legacy of success. I told them my father was a retired commodities broker who traveled the world, and you show up looking like you came to fix the plumbing. You are embarrassing us." Courtney crossed her arms, glaring at me with unconcealed disgust and that subtle prejudice she always carried. "We already set a place for you in the back near the kitchen staff. Just drop the gift and leave before someone asks who you are." I stood there, looking at the son I had sacrificed my youth to raise. I looked at the tailored suit he wore, the arrogance in his posture, the absolute lack of respect in his eyes. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his money clip, and peeled off a crisp $100 bill. He shoved it roughly into the breast pocket of my old jacket. "Take a cab home," he ordered, turning his back on me. "Do not drive that embarrassing truck out of here while my guests are arriving. Just go." Without another word, they both turned and walked back toward the music and the laughter, leaving me standing alone next to the garbage bins. I did not yell after them. I did not demand the respect a father deserves. I simply reached into my pocket, took out the $100 bill, and let it flutter to the floor. I walked out the service exit, the cold night air hitting my face. I walked past the line of luxury cars back to my rusted Ford pickup. I climbed inside, closed the door, and sat in the quiet darkness of the cabin. I did not shed a single tear. Tears are for people who are surprised by betrayal. I was not surprised. I was simply done. I reached into my inner coat pocket and pulled out my smartphone. Not the cheap, outdated phone Tyson thought I used, but a secure, highly encrypted device. I opened my banking application, bypassing the biometric security to access my master corporate portfolio. My eyes locked onto the screen. The notification was glowing brightly. Just 10 minutes ago, Tyson had settled the final deposit for the country club, $25,000 charged in a single swipe. What my arrogant self-made millionaire of a son did not know was that the exclusive angel investment fund that bankrolled his entire startup, the fund that issued him that elite black corporate credit card, did not belong to a group of anonymous venture capitalists. It belonged to me. Tyson thought he had outgrown me. He thought his father was a pathetic, penniless manual laborer who could be shoved out the back door and bought off with a single banknote. He had no idea that the very ground he walked on, the company he boasted about, and the extravagant party he was hosting right now were entirely funded by my silent real estate and logistics empire. I stared at the transaction on the screen, my thumb hovering over the administrative controls. He wanted me out of his life because I was an embarrassment. I decided to grant him his wish permanently. I stared at the transaction on the screen for another moment before tapping the exit button. I scrolled to my encrypted contacts and hit call. The phone rang only once before a crisp professional voice answered. "Good evening, Gideon," Jonathan Pierce said. Pierce was my lead corporate attorney, a man whose ruthlessness in the boardroom was matched only by his absolute loyalty to my late wife and me. "Jonathan," I said, keeping my voice as calm as the cold night air outside my truck, "I need you to initiate a total financial freeze on Vanguard Holdings. That is the shell company funding Tyson." Pierce did not hesitate. He asked no questions and offered no judgments. "Understood. To what extent?" "Total," I replied. "Freeze all corporate accounts. Zero out the credit limits on every company card issued to Tyson and his executive team. Cancel his personal expense accounts linked to the firm. I want his financial access completely severed. Effective immediately." There was a brief sound of rapid typing on the other end of the line. "What about the secondary credit lines used for the country club and his residential leases?" Pierce asked. "Cut them all," I instructed. "If his name is attached to our capital, burn the bridge. I want it done right now. I will make the calls, Gideon. The cards will decline within 60 seconds. Consider him financially isolated." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the passenger seat. I started the engine of my rusty Ford, the loud rumble vibrating through the steering wheel. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I watched the glowing lights of the Oak Ridge Country Club fade in my rearview mirror. As I drove down the darkened streets toward my neighborhood, I thought about the sheer magnitude of my son's delusion. For the past 5 years, Tyson had paraded himself across business magazines and social media as a self-made visionary. He boasted about how he hustled to secure seed capital from an exclusive anonymous angel investor group. He loved telling crowds how he built his tech startup from the ground up, claiming he did it all without any help from his working-class background. He practically wore his fabricated struggle like a badge of honor while actively despising the father who actually lived it. What Tyson never knew was that his brilliant pitch deck had been rejected by every major firm in the city. He was drowning in debt and on the verge of bankruptcy. Lorraine could not bear to watch him fail, so I created the Anonymous Angel Fund. I funneled millions of my own real estate profits into his failing startup, giving him the illusion of competence. I gave him the empire he was currently using to look down on me. I built his pedestal, and now I was knocking down the pillars. I arrived at my modest single-story house on the east side of town. It was the same house Tyson grew up in, the one he now refused to visit because the neighborhood was not upscale enough for his new aesthetic. I walked inside, the familiar scent of old wood and Lorraine's favorite lavender soap welcoming me. I did not even have time to take off my gray suit jacket before my smartphone buzzed in my pocket. It was a high-priority alert from my front door security camera. I pulled out the device and opened the live video feed. Standing on my porch, illuminated by the harsh yellow light, was Tyson. His custom-tailored midnight blue tuxedo was completely disheveled. His bow tie was undone, hanging loosely around his neck, and his face was slick with sweat. He was hyperventilating, the arrogant facade completely shattered by the reality of a declined piece of plastic. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving as he frantically slammed his fist against my front door. "Dad." Dad opened the door. "I need your help." I stared at the screen, my face entirely blank. Just an hour ago, I was an embarrassment, a filthy manual laborer who needed to be hidden in the service hallway. Now he was banging on my door in the middle of the night. I watched him pull out his phone, pacing furiously across my small concrete porch. He dialed a number, holding the phone to his ear, his hands shaking violently. He was calling his chief financial officer. "What do you mean you cannot fix it?" Tyson yelled into the receiver, his voice echoing loudly enough that the camera microphone picked up every desperate syllable. The card declined in front of the entire country club. The event manager literally cut off the music and pulled me off the dance floor. "It is $25,000. Call the bank. Call the investors. I do not care what time it is." Tyson kicked the wooden post of my porch, cursing loudly into the night air. Through the camera feed, I heard the faint, tiny voice of his executive on the other end of the phone telling him that the entire corporate account had been frozen. The Angel Fund had severed ties. "What do you mean they pulled the funding?" Tyson shrieked, his voice cracking with pure panic. "They cannot just do that without warning. I have guests eating caviar. I have investors drinking imported champagne. The venue manager says if I do not wire the funds in 10 minutes, they are calling the police for theft of services. I cannot go to jail for fraud over a Sweet 16 party. Courtney is having a panic attack in the lobby. Fix this right now." He hung up the phone and threw it against the wooden siding of my house. He went back to pounding on my front door, hitting it so hard the glass pane rattled. "Dad, please. I know you are in there. I know you have that emergency savings account. I just need a loan. I will pay you back tomorrow. I swear on my life. Just open the door." I stood in the dark hallway less than 3 feet away from the door. I could hear his ragged breathing through the thick wood. I could hear the absolute desperation of a man watching his carefully constructed house of cards collapse into dust. All he wanted was my emergency savings, the pathetic little nest egg he assumed I had hoarded from a non-existent pension. Even now, in his darkest moment, he viewed me as nothing more than a desperate final option, a piggy bank to be smashed open to save his public pride. I did not say a word. I did not yell back. I simply reached out and slowly, silently turned the brass deadbolt locking the door firmly in place. I looked down at my phone screen, watching him bury his face in his hands, completely defeated. With a single tap, I turned off the camera monitor. I plunged the house back into absolute silence. Let the country club call the police. Let Courtney suffer the humiliation of being escorted out of her own high society party by uniformed officers. Let Tyson explain to his wealthy friends why his magical fortune had suddenly vanished into thin air. I walked into my bedroom and pulled open the closet doors. I reached up and pulled down an old, sturdy leather suitcase Lorraine had bought for me years ago. I placed it on the bed and popped the metal latches. I opened my dresser drawers and began meticulously packing my clothes. I folded my shirts, my trousers, and gathered my personal documents. I emptied the small safe hidden in the floorboards, taking only the few sentimental items that mattered to me. Everything else, the cheap furniture, the outdated television, the life of poverty I had simulated for his benefit, could stay right here to collect dust. I was not just packing for a trip. I was dismantling the life of the poor retired railroad worker they thought I was. The father they despised was officially clocking out. Tomorrow morning they would wake up to a financial nightmare, and when they came looking for the old man they thought they could manipulate, they would find absolutely nothing. I closed the leather suitcase and let the heavy metal latches snap shut. The sound was sharp and final. I walked over to the small wooden desk in the corner of the living room. It was time to erase the man they thought I was and set the stage for the fools they were about to become. I turned on the heavy-duty paper shredder and fed it every genuine document tying me to my real identity. Bank statements, property tax receipts, and encrypted correspondence with Jonathan Pierce all turned to confetti. In their place, I carefully arranged a new narrative on the desk. I laid out a stack of fake overdue utility bills I had printed months ago. Final notices warning of imminent power shutoffs and water disconnections. Then I walked into the bathroom and opened the medicine cabinet. I took a standard bottle of daily multivitamins, peeled off the generic label, and replaced it with a custom pharmacy sticker I had acquired precisely for this occasion. It boldly read, "Strong sedative take is needed for severe anxiety and severe mental confusion." I placed the bottle right in the center of the kitchen counter, impossible to miss. When Tyson and Courtney eventually broke into this house looking for whatever pennies they could steal, they would not find a millionaire. They would find the pathetic, confused, heavily medicated old man they always wanted me to be. They would think I was an easy target for legal guardianship. I was handing them the exact shovel they would use to dig their own graves. I paused by the front door, looking at a framed photograph of Lorraine hanging on the faded wallpaper. She looked so beautiful, smiling under the summer sun just a year before the illness took her. The memory of her final days hit me with the force of a physical blow. We were in the sterile white hospital room. She held my hand, her grip incredibly weak, but her eyes burning with an intense, agonizing clarity. "Gideon," she had whispered, her voice barely carrying over the hum of the heart monitor. "We gave Tyson everything, but we forgot to teach him what happens when everything is gone. Do not let him inherit our legacy if he does not have the character to carry it. Strip it away. Test his spirit. See if he loves the father who raised him, or just the wallet that funds him." I promised her I would do exactly that. For 5 years, I played the role of the impoverished pensioner. I watched my son mutate into a monster of pure vanity, discarding his heritage for the approval of country club elites. The test was officially over. He had failed spectacularly. The sudden vibration of my phone broke the silence of the empty house. A new voicemail notification popped up on the screen. It was from Courtney. I pressed play, putting the speaker on high volume so her shrill, entitled voice echoed off the bare walls. "Gideon, what the hell is wrong with you?" she screamed, her tone dripping with absolute venom. "Tyson is in the living room having a total breakdown. The venue management humiliated us. They escorted us out through the lobby in front of the mayor and 2 venture capitalists. We had to surrender Tyson's Rolex and my diamond necklace just to keep them from calling the police. All because you decided to show up and curse our night. You brought this bad luck on us with your cheap suit and your rusted truck. You embarrassed him so badly he could not even think straight, and now his accounts are frozen pending some ridiculous bank error." I listened with a cold, detached fascination. She took no responsibility. She blamed my mere presence for the collapse of their financial world. But the entitlement did not stop there. Her voice grew even sharper, vibrating with an ugly, desperate authority. "Listen to me very carefully, old man. Tyson is calling his friends to secure a bridge loan, but you are going to fix this. Tomorrow morning, you are going to march down to your local bank, cash out that pathetic little retirement fund you have been hoarding, and wire every single cent to Tyson's account. Do you understand me? You owe us for ruining our daughter's party. If you do not transfer that pension money by noon, I swear to God you will never see Aaliyah again. You will never step foot in our house, and you will die alone in that dump you call a home. Fix it." The message ended with a loud, aggressive click. I stood completely still. She was using my granddaughter as a bargaining chip to extort a retired railroad worker out of his life savings to pay for a country club tab. It was an astonishing display of moral bankruptcy. Courtney actually believed she held all the power. She genuinely thought I was a fragile, terrified old man who would eagerly empty his pockets just to stay in her good graces. I deleted the voicemail immediately. I did not need to keep it. The complete destruction of their lives was already in motion, and this vile message only cemented my resolve. I grabbed the handle of my leather suitcase and pulled it behind me. The wheels rolled smoothly over the scuffed hardwood floor. I took one last look at the rundown living room, the peeling paint, the worn-out sofa. This house had served its purpose. It was the perfect stage for the perfect illusion. Now it was just a trap waiting to be sprung. I stepped out onto the front porch and pulled the door shut behind me. The deadbolt clicked into place with a satisfying thud. The early morning air was crisp, the sky just beginning to turn a deep shade of purple before the dawn. I walked down the cracked concrete path toward my rusty Ford pickup, tossing the suitcase into the passenger seat. Before I could even put the key into the ignition, my phone erupted with a blaring, high-pitched alarm. It was not a standard ringtone or a text notification. It was a Tier 1 security breach alert from my private banking server. The screen flashed bright red, illuminating the dark cabin of the truck. Unauthorized access attempt detected. I opened the security dashboard. The system was showing multiple failed login attempts on my personal retirement account. Not the massive corporate funds, but the small decoy pension account I maintained under my public identity. Someone was trying to brute force their way into the account, successfully answering my security questions by using my birth date, Lorraine's maiden name, and my old railroad employee identification number. The geographic ping located the internet protocol address less than 10 miles away. It was coming directly from Tyson's smart home network. My son was not waiting for me to wire the money. He was actively trying to hack into his own father's retirement fund to steal it while I slept. He was trying to strip away the last few dollars he thought I had to my name to save his public image. A slow, chilling smile spread across my face. The absolute desperation was pathetic. He had crossed the final line from arrogant ingrate to outright criminal. I tapped the screen, authorizing a total lockdown of the decoy account, and put the truck into gear. Let him try. I pressed the master override button on my secure screen, watching the digital progress bar fill as my security system executed the final command. The decoy retirement account was now permanently locked and flagged for fraudulent access. Any further attempts to penetrate the firewall from Tyson's home network would automatically trigger a localized alert, blocking his device completely. I tossed the phone onto the passenger seat and shifted the rusty transmission into drive. The old Ford lurched forward with a heavy mechanical groan, leaving the cracked pavement and overgrown lawns of my old neighborhood behind. I drove toward the heart of the city, watching the sun slowly rise over the towering glass skyscrapers. For 5 long years, I had navigated these streets as a ghost. I played the part of a forgotten relic of the working class, a man who supposedly lived paycheck to paycheck on a meager pension. But as the towering skyline grew closer, that fabricated persona shed from me, like a snake casting off dead skin. The man who accepted folded $100 bills and endured public insults at the service entrance of a country club was gone forever. I bypassed the public parking sectors and pulled the truck into a highly secure private underground facility beneath the city's most exclusive residential high-rise. The valet attendants here did not sneer at my vehicle or judge my appearance. They knew exactly who I was and what I owned. I left the keys in the ignition, grabbed my worn leather suitcase, and stepped into the private biometric elevator. The automated scanner read my retina and the doors slid shut, rocketing me upward to the summit of the tower. The doors opened to reveal my actual home. The penthouse spanned the entire top floor, featuring massive floor-to-ceiling windows that offered an uninterrupted panoramic view of the empire Lorraine and I had built together. It was a space defined by minimalist elegance. Dark mahogany floors, polished marble countertops, and quiet, absolute authority. This was the sanctuary we had designed for our golden years, long before her illness forced us to change our plans. I walked straight to the master suite and stripped off the cheap thrift store gray suit. I threw the garments directly into the trash bin, disgusted by the physical reminder of my son's contempt. I stepped into the rainfall shower, turning the heat up high, letting the scalding water wash away the lingering stench of the country club kitchen and the stifling humility I had forced myself to wear for half a decade. When I stepped into my expansive walk-in closet, I did not reach for worn flannel or faded denim. I selected a bespoke $5,000 charcoal suit tailored to absolute perfection. I put on a crisp, heavy cotton white shirt and fastened a silk tie around my neck. I slid a heavy platinum watch onto my wrist. I looked at my reflection in the full-length mirror. The tired, defeated old railroad worker was completely eradicated. In his place stood Gideon, the corporate titan, the ruthless architect of a logistics fortune, and the very man Tyson was currently begging for a financial lifeline. I walked into the massive, pristine kitchen and poured myself a cup of premium black coffee. The rich aroma filled the room, a stark contrast to the instant sludge I drank in the old house to keep up appearances. Just as I took my first sip, my encrypted tablet buzzed on the marble island. It was an incoming, secure transmission from Dominic, a former corporate intelligence operative who now worked exclusively as my private investigator. Dominic was a ghost in the physical world, a man who specialized in gathering leverage and crushing opposition quietly. The message contained a single line of text. "The rats have entered the maze." I tapped the notification, bringing up a live high-definition video feed. The hidden cameras I had discreetly installed throughout my old house were now broadcasting directly to my screen. The front door of my modest home violently splintered open, the wooden frame cracking under brute force. Tyson stumbled into the living room, his face bright red with exhaustion, fury, and absolute panic. Courtney followed closely behind him, clutching her expensive designer handbag against her chest, as if the very air inside my house would contaminate her lungs. They looked exactly like a pair of desperate scavengers. Tyson immediately began tearing the living room apart. He ripped the cushions off the sofa and threw them across the room. He flipped over the armchair and pulled every book off the small wooden shelf, violently shaking the pages. He was hunting for cash, for a checkbook, for bank statements, for anything he could use to salvage his imploding financial reality. "Find his pension documents," Tyson barked at his wife, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Check the bedroom. He has to have a ledger or an account number written down somewhere. We just need enough collateral to secure a line of credit until my corporate freeze is lifted." Courtney pinched her nose, looking around the modest space with absolute revulsion. "I cannot believe you actually grew up in this dump," she muttered, opening a single drawer with 2 fingers before kicking it shut in disgust. "It smells like mothballs, cheap laundry detergent, and failure." "There is nothing here, Tyson. He is completely broke." "Shut up and look," Tyson screamed, a thick vein bulging in his forehead. He practically ran into my old bedroom, tearing the sheets off the mattress and violently yanking the dresser drawers entirely out of their tracks. Clothes scattered across the floor in a messy pile. He smashed the small floorboard safe open with a heavy iron wrench, only to find it completely empty. Through the crisp audio feed, I could hear his heavy, ragged breathing as his desperation turned into pure, unadulterated terror. He marched back into the living room, kicking a wooden chair violently out of his way. I watched my son, a man who relentlessly bragged to magazines about his elite business acumen, reduced to a frantic thief burglarizing his own father's home just to survive the morning. Tyson paced into the kitchen, gripping his hair in his hands, muttering curses under his breath. His eyes darted wildly around the small space until they landed on the counter. He stopped dead in his tracks. There, sitting perfectly illuminated by the morning sun coming through the window, was the paper shredder filled to the brim with confetti. Sitting right next to it was the modified pill bottle I had carefully staged. Tyson walked over slowly and picked up the plastic bottle. The hidden camera zoomed in, automatically catching the exact moment his expression shifted entirely. He squinted, reading the large customized warning label out loud. "Strong sedative. Take as needed for severe anxiety and severe mental confusion." The sheer panic that had consumed his face for the last 12 hours slowly melted away. It was replaced by a cold, calculating, and deeply sinister smirk. The gears in his morally bankrupt mind were turning rapidly, assembling a new narrative that would justify his ultimate betrayal. He turned around and held the plastic bottle high up in the air for Courtney to see. "Look at this," he said, his voice dropping an octave, completely devoid of the frantic hysteria from moments ago. "His pension documents are shredded into dust, and he left his heavy medication right here on the counter." Courtney walked into the kitchen, her high heels clicking sharply against the cheap linoleum floor. "What does that mean for us?" she asked, her eyes narrowing as she read the bold print on the label. "It means the senile old man wandered off without his pills," Tyson said, a dark, wicked chuckle escaping his throat. "He is mentally compromised. He is wandering the streets right now, completely confused and legally incapable of making rational financial decisions." Courtney gasped, a malicious grin slowly spreading across her face as she understood the implication. Tyson stepped closer to the camera, completely unaware he was broadcasting his own ruin directly to the man he was plotting against. "We do not need his permission to transfer those pension funds anymore," Tyson whispered, his eyes gleaming with greedy triumph. "We do not need him to sign a single document. This is the perfect opportunity. We are going straight to a judge today. We are filing a missing persons report and petitioning the court for full legal guardianship over his entire estate." I took a slow, deliberate sip of my coffee, watching him slide the fake pills into his tailored jacket pocket. He had swallowed the bait whole hook, line, and sinker. I watched through Dominic's secure video feed as Tyson and Courtney practically sprinted out of my old house. They did not waste a single second. Within the hour, my encrypted tablet alerted me to a rapid series of new developments. Dominic had successfully tapped into the local precinct's dispatch logs and court filing systems. Tyson was currently standing inside the downtown police station, officially filing a missing persons report for his father. But he certainly did not stop there. The priority notifications from my attorney, Jonathan Pierce, started rolling in immediately after. Tyson had already retained a bottom-feeding family law attorney to file an emergency ex parte petition in probate court. He was aggressively seeking temporary and eventually permanent legal guardianship over me and my entire estate. He formally claimed I was a severe danger to myself. He submitted the photograph of the shredded documents and the fake pill bottle as his primary irrefutable evidence. He wanted full conservatorship. He demanded the legal authority to sign my name, access my bank accounts, and sell my assets without my presence, notification, or consent. It was a swift, aggressive legal strike designed to strip me of my fundamental human rights before I even had the chance to defend myself. He thought he was moving far faster than I could ever react. He thought he was playing a brilliant game of chess, while his senile old father was wandering aimlessly through the dangerous city streets. He had absolutely no idea he was moving exactly where I wanted him to go, acting like a starving rat following a trail of poisoned cheese straight into a steel trap. The elder guardianship system in this country was originally designed to protect the vulnerable and the incapacitated. Lorraine and I had studied it extensively years ago when her own mother fell ill. We learned very quickly how easily it could be weaponized by greedy, opportunistic relatives. It is a terrifying, massive legal loophole. If a family member can convince a judge that an elderly parent is suffering from severe cognitive decline, the court can strip that parent of their autonomy almost overnight. The appointed guardian gains absolute financial control. They can legally liquidate homes, empty retirement accounts, and redirect pensions, all under the false guise of paying for necessary medical care and supervision. The elderly victim is rendered legally voiceless, treated like a piece of property rather than a person. Tyson knew exactly how this broken system operated. He knew that emergency petitions were often rubber-stamped by overworked judges who preferred to err on the side of caution to prevent a senior citizen from wandering into traffic. He figured if he could secure a temporary conservatorship today, he could legally drain my supposed pension fund by sunset to save his sinking startup company. He viewed my life, my freedom, and my dignity as perfectly acceptable collateral damage for his own financial survival. Dominic, always remaining a step ahead of the opposition, managed to securely clone the surveillance footage from the precinct lobby. He routed the live video and audio directly to my penthouse screen. I sat back in my leather chair, sipping my premium coffee as I watched the performance of a lifetime unfold. Tyson was standing at the front desk, leaning heavily against the counter as if he could barely support his own weight. His expensive silk tie was completely gone now, his custom shirt wrinkled just enough to sell the compelling narrative of a panicked, sleep-deprived son. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with perfectly manufactured sobs. It was an absolute masterclass in emotional manipulation. "Officer, you have to find him," Tyson pleaded, his voice cracking with just the right amount of anguish. "He has not been right in the head for months. He gets confused. He forgets where he is and who he is talking to. I came to check on him this morning and the door was broken. His house was completely trashed and he was gone. He left his severe anxiety medication right on the counter. If he is out there alone having a mental episode, he might get hurt or robbed. Please, you do not understand how incredibly fragile he is." The desk sergeant, a seasoned cop who usually saw right through people's lies, looked at Tyson with genuine, heartfelt sympathy. He handed my son a tissue. Courtney stood right behind Tyson, rubbing his back with practiced affection, flawlessly playing the role of the supportive, deeply worried daughter-in-law. "We love him so much," Courtney added delicately, wiping a non-existent tear from her perfectly manicured eye. "He is the beloved patriarch of our family. We just want him home safe so we can get him the professional medical care he desperately needs right now." I watched the display with absolute chilling disgust. These were the exact same two people who had forcefully shoved me into a service hallway just 24 hours ago. The same people who had just finished violently ransacking my home looking for cash. Now, under the bright fluorescent lights of the police station, they were playing the parts of devoted, heartbroken children. Tyson handed the officer his phone, showing him the picture of the shredded documents. "He shredded all his important papers, officer. He is completely paranoid. He thinks people are after him. Please tell me you can put out a silver alert. Tell me you have patrol units looking for him." The officer assured him they would dispatch multiple vehicles immediately to scour the neighborhood and check local hospitals. Tyson nodded, sniffing loudly, thanking the officer profusely for his dedication. As soon as Tyson and Courtney turned away from the desk to walk out of the precinct, the hidden lobby camera captured the instantaneous shift in their demeanor. The moment they stepped out the heavy glass doors and hit the sidewalk, the fake tears vanished instantly. Tyson's shoulders straightened out. The grieving facade dropped entirely. He checked his phone, a hard, calculating, arrogant scowl returning to his face. He had successfully planted the seed. The authorities were officially looking for a crazy old man, and the courts were rapidly processing his guardianship papers. He believed he had just checkmated me. I closed the video feed, a cold, heavy satisfaction settling over me. Let the police look all they wanted. They would never find the impoverished, confused railroad worker because that man no longer existed. I stood up and walked toward the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling city that I secretly owned a massive piece of. Just as I was admiring the morning view, the secure encrypted line on my desk phone began to ring. It was Jonathan Pierce. The intense urgency in his voice was palpable the very second I answered the call. "Gideon, we have a major unprecedented escalation," Pierce said, skipping the formalities entirely. "Tyson just made a catastrophic, highly illegal move." I did not think he would be this reckless, but panic makes people incredibly stupid. "What did he do?" I asked, my tone completely unwavering. While he was waiting for the guardianship petition to clear the courts, his creditors started breathing down his neck, Pierce explained rapidly. The country club incident leaked to his circle. Word is out that his startup is entirely insolvent. To stop the financial bleeding, he just secured a $500,000 bridge loan. I raised an eyebrow. A traditional bank would never approve that kind of capital with his corporate accounts completely frozen. Where exactly did he get the funds? He did not go to a bank, Pierce replied grimly. He went to Viktor Romanov. He took a predatory cash loan from a violent shadow syndicate. And Gideon, the weekly interest rate is pure extortion, but that is not the worst part. To secure the funds immediately, Tyson fraudulently leveraged your old house as collateral. He forged a preliminary deed transfer using the pending emergency guardianship filing as proof of his legal authority. If he defaults on this loan, the syndicate gets your property, and they do not play by the rules of civil court. My son had just illegally mortgaged a house he did not own to a ruthless criminal syndicate. I smiled, a dark, deeply dangerous grin forming on my face as I looked down at the city streets. "Thank you, Jonathan," I said quietly. "Do not block the transaction. Let the funds clear his account." Tyson thought he had outsmarted everyone. He had absolutely no idea he had just handed me the very weapon I would use to destroy his life completely. I did not hang up the phone. I let the silence hang between Jonathan and me for a brief moment, letting the sheer magnitude of Tyson's stupidity settle in the air. "Jonathan," I finally said, keeping my voice dangerously calm. "Contact Viktor Romanov's syndicate immediately. Use our primary offshore shell corporation, the one completely untraceable to my personal portfolio or the Vanguard Fund. I want to buy that debt." Jonathan let out a low, sharp whistle over the encrypted line. "Gideon Romanov does not sell his paper easily. These underground syndicates hold on to their leverage like a vice. It will cost a heavy, unreasonable premium to buy him out of a fresh contract." "I do not care about the premium," I replied firmly. "Offer him 20% above the principal cash transferred within the hour. Tell him he gets a completely clean, untraceable profit without having to break any legs to collect. Tyson thinks he owes his life to a criminal enterprise, but I want to be the one holding his leash. Make the transaction seamless. By the time Tyson wakes up tomorrow, I want his soul belonging exclusively to me." Jonathan agreed, his fingers already typing furiously in the background to set the complex financial transfer in motion. Within 45 minutes, the deed was fully executed. A secure notification popped up on my encrypted tablet confirming the immediate transfer of the $500,000 debt. I was no longer just the father Tyson despised. I was the absolute master of his immediate future. I held the fraudulent mortgage on my own house, and when the time came, I would call in the debt with extreme, uncompromising prejudice. There was nothing in this world I despised more than the illusion of wealth built entirely on borrowed money. Lorraine and I had worked our fingers to the bone, living in cramped apartments with leaky roofs and eating canned soup just to save enough capital to make our first real estate investment. We never spent a single dollar we did not actually own. We understood that true power was quiet, solid, and entirely debt-free. We built our logistics network by negotiating hard contracts, not by flashing designer labels to impress strangers. But Tyson had grown up infected by a modern toxic sickness. He wanted the billionaire lifestyle without putting in a single day of actual grueling labor. He leased the luxury cars, financed the custom-tailored suits, and took out massive high-interest loans to fund his startup's lavish office space just to look successful on social media platforms. He was a hollow shell painted in expensive gold. He looked down on the working class, completely blind to the fact that his entire existence was funded by the very people he mocked. He treated credit lines like free money, assuming the consequences would never catch up to him. Now his fake empire was violently crashing down around him, and instead of taking responsibility, he was trying to borrow his way out of a bottomless pit, using my name and my property as his shield. While Tyson was busy mortgaging his freedom to the criminal underworld, his wife was executing a completely different yet equally sickening strategy. My tablet buzzed with a direct message from Dominic. He sent me a link to a popular social media platform. "You are going to want to see this immediately," his message read. I tapped the link and my high-definition screen filled with Courtney's face. She was sitting in the immaculate living room of their leased mansion, perfectly lit by natural sunlight to highlight her manufactured sorrow. She wore no makeup, a calculated theatrical choice to make her look devastated and exhausted. She looked directly into the camera lens, her lower lip trembling flawlessly. "Hi, everyone," Courtney began, her voice cracking with fake emotion. "I never thought I would have to make a video like this. Our family is going through an unimaginable tragedy. My sweet beloved father-in-law Gideon has gone missing. He has been suffering from severe cognitive decline, and he wandered away from his home yesterday morning without his vital medication. We are absolutely heartbroken and terrified for his safety." She paused, wiping a completely dry eye with the sleeve of her oversized cashmere sweater. "Tyson has been out all night searching the streets, working directly with the police, but we need help. We are starting a GoFundMe campaign to hire elite private investigators, deploy search helicopters, and put up billboards across the entire state. Please, if you can spare anything, help us bring our dad home. We cannot live without him." She set the campaign goal at $50,000. The description below the video was a masterpiece of fictional storytelling. She wrote about how I was a pillar of the community, how Tyson spent every weekend caring for me, and how the medical system had failed our family. She even tagged several prominent local politicians and news stations, trying to maximize the viral reach of her scam. I watched the progress bar on the donation page steadily climb. $10,000, $15,000, $20,000. Her wealthy, gullible friends from the country club, desperate to show their philanthropic support on social media, were throwing money at her fake tragedy. But I knew the absolute truth. There were no elite private investigators. There were no search helicopters. The local police were doing a standard missing persons check, which cost absolutely nothing. Courtney was leveraging my supposed disappearance to crowdfund her way out of the massive debt Tyson had incurred at the country club the night before. She was using the tragic narrative of a missing mentally compromised black man to pay off her elite society membership dues, settle the catering bills, and avoid facing criminal charges for theft of services. It was brilliant in its absolute depravity. She was exploiting the very man she had forced out the back door just to keep her standing among her shallow, elitist friends. I watched her wipe her fake tears, feeling a profound sickness in my stomach. She was a master manipulator, weaponizing public empathy for pure financial gain. They were the perfect match, Tyson and Courtney. Two parasites feeding off the goodwill and resources of everyone around them, utterly convinced of their own absolute superiority. I was just about to close the application in disgust when my screen refreshed, displaying a brand new notification in the comment section of Courtney's tearful video. The comment was posted by a verified account belonging to Aaliyah, my 16-year-old granddaughter. I stared at the text, my heart swelling with an unexpected surge of pride. Aaliyah had typed out a message that cut right through her mother's elaborate performance with absolute brutal honesty. "Stop lying to these people," the comment read. "You literally called Grandpa a piece of trash yesterday and forced him to stand by the garbage cans at my party. You and Dad hate him. You just want this money to pay off the country club because Dad's credit cards got declined in front of everyone. Do not give her a single dime. She is scamming all of you." The comment was a digital bomb dropped directly into Courtney's perfectly curated social media presence. I watched the screen intensely, knowing exactly what would happen next. Less than 10 seconds later, the comment abruptly vanished. Courtney was actively monitoring the page, deleting the exposure before it could gain any traction or alert her wealthy donors to the massive fraud she was committing. She scrubbed Aaliyah's truth from the internet with frantic speed, completely erasing the one honest voice in her entire household in order to protect her lucrative lie. But she was not fast enough. My tablet chimed again. Dominic had sent a new encrypted file. It was a high-resolution screenshot of Aaliyah's comment captured and permanently archived in our secure server the very second she posted it. Dominic added a brief text below the image. "I have the proof safely stored. She cannot hide this." I smiled, feeling a deep, genuine warmth for my granddaughter. Aaliyah was the only one in that house who had not been corrupted by their toxic vanity. She had tried to do the right thing, and she had inadvertently handed me the exact ammunition I needed to publicly execute Courtney's reputation. I did not just sit on that screenshot. I immediately forwarded Dominic's archived image of Aaliyah's deleted comment directly to the Trust and Safety Division of the crowdfunding platform. But I did not stop there. Using a secure anonymous proxy server, I attached a digital copy of the country club's final demand for payment, clearly showing the exact amount Courtney was attempting to extort from the public under the guise of a family tragedy. I sent the entire package to the platform's fraud department, carbon copying the local news stations and the elite socialite groups she had so proudly tagged in her video. The digital execution was swift and absolutely merciless. Within 45 minutes, the donation page was abruptly suspended. The progress bar froze at $22,000 before a red banner appeared across the top of her campaign, officially labeling it as under investigation for fraudulent activity. The funds were locked completely out of her reach, and automated refund emails were already hitting the inboxes of her wealthy friends. The humiliation did not remain private. The screenshot of her own daughter exposing the scam began circulating through the country club's private group chats like wildfire. The same people who were praising her bravery just an hour ago were now actively tearing her reputation to shreds, calling her a shameless grifter. Her phone must have been ringing off the hook with demands for explanations she could not possibly provide. Her carefully crafted high society image was instantly reduced to absolute rubble. Watching her social demise was a specific, highly satisfying brand of justice. From the very first day Tyson brought Courtney to our old house, she had made it abundantly clear that my presence was a stain on her pristine upper-crust aspirations. She possessed that insidious, quiet type of prejudice, the kind masked by polite smiles and backhanded compliments. She would constantly make subtle, degrading remarks about my neighborhood, my speech, and the blue-collar dirt she claimed was permanently ingrained in my fingernails. She viewed my working-class black heritage not as a foundation of resilience, but as an embarrassing genetic hurdle that she and Tyson had to actively suppress to be accepted by their affluent peers. She treated me like an uneducated relic, a primitive ancestor who was entirely unfit to sit at her modern, sophisticated table. She truly believed her pale skin and her acquired wealth made her intellectually and morally superior to a man who built train tracks and flipped rundown duplexes. Now that same woman was universally exposed as a common desperate thief, publicly humiliated by her own mixed-race daughter. The collapse of the crowdfunding scam sent Tyson into a complete, unhinged spiral. Dominic's hidden cameras captured the immediate aftermath inside my old house. Tyson was pacing the living room like a trapped animal, screaming into his phone. He had lost his corporate accounts, he had lost the fraudulent charity money, and now he was running out of time. The shadow syndicate he had borrowed the $500,000 from did not care about frozen bank accounts or public relations nightmares. They only cared about the collateral. Tyson had forged the preliminary mortgage transfer using my property, but to fully execute the deed and keep the violent loan sharks off his back, he desperately needed my physical signature on a notarized property release. He needed the old man he had discarded to sign away the very roof over his head. I watched Tyson grab his laptop, aggressively pounding the keys as he searched for a quick solution. He did not hire the elite, highly trained private investigators Courtney had tearfully promised the public. He could not afford them. Instead, he scoured the bottom of the internet searching for a cheap, unlicensed bounty hunter, a cut-rate skip tracer who would not ask ethical questions about why a son was so desperate to force a missing, supposedly mentally incapacitated father to sign legal real estate documents. He found a sleazy bottom-feeding operative who worked out of a strip mall and paid him a meager cash retainer from the last few dollars he had managed to scrape together. Tyson's instructions to this cheap operative were loud and perfectly clear on my audio feed. "I do not care what condition he is in." Tyson barked into the phone, his voice devoid of any filial concern. Just find the old man and pin him down. Do not call the police. Do not take him to a hospital. Bring him directly to me. I have legal documents he needs to sign today, or I am going to lose everything." It was a stunning display of absolute predatory selfishness. He was not looking for his father to ensure he was safe, fed, or sheltered. He was hunting me down like a fugitive solely to extract the last ounce of financial utility from my existence. If he found me wandering the streets confused and vulnerable as he claimed I was, his first action would not be to offer a warm blanket or a hot meal. It would be to shove a pen into my hand and force me to sign away my home. He was entirely prepared to throw his own father onto the street to save his sinking ship. The sheer panic in his voice confirmed that he knew the mob would come collecting soon. He was a cornered rat willing to chew through his own bloodline to escape the trap he had set for himself. Every ounce of his privileged arrogance had evaporated, leaving behind a pathetic, frantic shell of a man who was fully prepared to execute the ultimate betrayal. But the cheap operative Tyson hired was not a skilled investigator. He was a lazy opportunist looking for a quick payout, and by late afternoon he delivered a phone call that would push my son into the darkest, most irredeemable corner of human morality. Dominic intercepted the call as it came through Tyson's phone. The investigator reported that he had not found me wandering the streets, but he had found something else. The local county morgue had just taken in a John Doe, an elderly black man found in an alleyway roughly my age and my physical build who had suffered a fatal heart attack. The investigator told Tyson it was a highly probable match and suggested he go down to the county facility for official identification. I watched the live feed as Tyson and Courtney received the news. There were no tears. There was no sudden collapse of grief. They simply looked at each other in stunned silence before grabbing their coats and rushing out the door. Dominic deployed a drone to track their vehicle to the county morgue, tapping into the facility's internal security cameras. The coroner pulled back the white sheet, revealing the face of a man who was clearly not me. The facial structure was different. The height was wrong. Any son who had spent a single day looking at his father would instantly know this was a stranger. Tyson stared at the lifeless face. He knew it was not me. He knew his father was still out there. But then a cold, calculating shift occurred in his eyes. A dead father meant immediate life insurance payouts. A dead father meant expedited probate and total control of the estate without needing a signature. Tyson looked at the medical examiner, summoned a perfectly fake expression of overwhelming grief, and slowly nodded his head. "Yes," Tyson whispered, placing a comforting arm around a quietly sobbing Courtney. "That is my father." I sat in the dim light of my penthouse, the massive city skyline glowing behind me, staring at the high-definition images Dominic had just securely transmitted to my tablet. The official county morgue documentation stared back at me, complete with Tyson's forged signature of identification. My son had looked down at a deceased stranger, an elderly man who possessed no physical resemblance to his father, other than the color of his skin, and formally declared him to be Gideon. It was not a mistake born of grief or a trick of the low morgue lighting. It was a calculated, cold-blooded execution on paper. Tyson wanted me dead. He needed me dead. A missing person case would take years to resolve legally. Years he simply did not have with a shadow syndicate breathing heavily down his neck. But a corpse meant an immediate death certificate, expedited probate court proceedings, and instant access to life insurance and physical assets. He was perfectly willing to bury an unknown man under my name just to save his own skin. I tapped the screen, securely archiving the morgue documents into my encrypted vault. If my son wanted to play the grieving orphan for the state, I would gladly grant him the stage. I decided right then and there to let the world believe I was dead. I would remain a ghost in the machine, entirely invisible from the penthouse, while I watched him confidently try to claim a kingdom that was rigged to explode the very moment he touched the throne. As I examined the digital copy of my own falsified death certificate, my mind drifted involuntarily back 40 years to the cramped, underfunded county hospital where Tyson took his first breath. The memory was sharp and painful. I remembered holding his fragile body in my calloused, grease-stained hands, his tiny fingers wrapping tightly around my thumb. Lorraine was exhausted, her face pale against the sterile pillows, but she was glowing with an absolute pure joy. I had looked down at my newborn son and made a silent, sacred vow to the universe. I swore that I would protect him with my life. I promised to break my back laying heavy railroad ties and pouring concrete so he would never have to know the crushing, suffocating weight of poverty that I grew up with. I spent decades fulfilling that exact promise. I sacrificed my own comfort, my own peace to build an impenetrable fortress of wealth around him. And now the boy I swore to die for was actively weaponizing my manufactured death to fund his shallow, pathetic lifestyle. The irony tasted like bitter ash in my mouth. I had built a massive financial empire to ensure my son would survive, and the very foundation of that empire had turned him into a ruthless parasite who would gladly step over my actual corpse to grab a fistful of dollars. Less than 48 hours later, Dominic had successfully hacked into the internal security feeds of my local bank branch. The high-resolution video buffered on my screen showing Tyson marching confidently into the lobby. He wore a sharp black morning suit playing the role of the dignified, heartbroken son to absolute perfection. Courtney walked right beside him, dabbing her dry eyes with a silk tissue, though her rigid posture radiated an arrogant, greedy victory. They sat down in the private office of the branch manager, a meticulous, no-nonsense man named Mr. Henderson. Tyson slid the freshly printed death certificate across the polished mahogany desk alongside his expedited probate filings. He spoke with aggressive entitlement, demanding immediate executive access to my personal checking accounts, my supposed pension funds, and the physical deed to the house, so he could officially transfer the title and satisfy his violent creditors. I watched Mr. Henderson push his thick glasses up the bridge of his nose, scrutinizing the paperwork with a deeply professional frown. I turned the volume up on my tablet, catching every word of the glorious devastation that was about to unfold. "I am incredibly sorry for your loss," Mr. Henderson said smoothly, typing a rapid sequence of commands into his secure computer terminal. "However, I cannot grant you access to these accounts, nor can I release the property deed to you." Tyson immediately puffed up his chest, his feigned grief evaporating into indignant, entitled rage. "What are you talking about?" Tyson snapped, pointing a stiff finger at the death certificate. "I am his only living son. I am his next of kin. That document gives me full executive control over his estate. I demand you release the funds and the title immediately." Mr. Henderson did not flinch. He slowly turned his monitor around so Tyson and Courtney could clearly see the bold red text glaring on the banking interface. "You do not understand," Mr. Henderson explained with a calm, practiced tone. "Your father did not own that house. He did not own those accounts. 10 years ago, Gideon transferred the deed to the property and the entirety of his personal liquid assets into a heavily fortified corporate trust. He is merely listed as a lifetime tenant and an administrative beneficiary." Tyson froze, the color draining completely from his face. "A trust," he choked out, his voice cracking with rising panic. "What trust? Who controls it?" Mr. Henderson folded his hands neatly on his desk. "The Vanguard Legacy Trust," he stated clearly. "Upon your father's passing, the trust dictates that the property cannot be sold, mortgaged, or liquidated under any circumstances. Furthermore, the sole designated heir to the remaining liquid assets is not you. The funds are legally locked in a high-yield maturation account solely for the benefit of your daughter Aaliyah, and she cannot access a single cent of it until her 25th birthday. You have absolutely no legal claim to this estate." Tyson sat in the plush bank chair completely paralyzed. His entire body went rigid as the sheer, terrifying magnitude of his failure crashed down on his shoulders. The house he had fraudulently used as collateral to secure a $500,000 loan from a violent shadow syndicate did not belong to him, and it never would. The mob was going to come looking to seize a property that was legally protected by an impenetrable corporate wall. Courtney, on the other hand, erupted into absolute unhinged panic. She jumped out of her chair, her perfectly manicured facade shattering into a million jagged pieces right in front of the branch manager. "We need that house," she screamed, completely abandoning the grieving daughter-in-law act. "We need that money right now. This is a mistake." He was a senile old man. He did not know what he was doing when he signed those papers. Mr. Henderson politely but firmly asked them to leave his office, warning them that any further disruption would result in armed security escorting them out of the building. I watched them stumble out of the bank and onto the bright sidewalk looking like two panicked animals backed into a deadly corner. Tyson's hands were shaking so violently he dropped his car keys onto the concrete pavement. "We are dead," Tyson muttered, his eyes wide with genuine, unadulterated terror. "The syndicate is going to kill us." Courtney grabbed him by the lapels of his expensive suit, her face twisted into a mask of pure, vicious desperation. "No," she hissed, her voice dripping with toxic venom. "We are not losing everything over a dead man and a teenager. We go home right now. We corner that ungrateful brat Aaliyah and we force her to sign a legal waiver renouncing her rights to the entire inheritance. If she refuses, we hire the most aggressive litigator in this city and we sue the trust in court. We will prove the old man was insane. I will drag my own daughter through the mud if I have to." The tires of Tyson's leased luxury SUV screeched onto the pristine driveway of their rented mansion. Before the vehicle even came to a complete stop, Courtney threw her door open and marched toward the front entrance, her heels striking the pavement like a judge's gavel. Tyson hurried behind her, clutching a freshly printed stack of legal documents he had hastily drafted on the drive home. They burst into the house and headed straight up the sweeping staircase to Aaliyah's bedroom. Courtney did not bother knocking. She kicked the door open, startling her daughter, who was sitting quietly on her bed reading a book. Courtney marched over to the desk, slammed a pristine white legal waiver down onto the polished wood, and threw a heavy silver pen on top of it. "Sign this right now!" Courtney demanded, her voice shrill and entirely devoid of any maternal warmth. Aaliyah looked down at the dense legal jargon, her eyes catching the bold heading that read, "Renunciation of Beneficiary Rights." She looked back up at her mother, her expression hardening. "No," Aaliyah said flatly. "I am not signing anything that belongs to Grandpa." Tyson stepped into the doorway, his massive frame blocking the exit. "Do not test us today. Aaliyah." Tyson growled, his face still pale from the sheer terror of his mounting debts. "You owe us. We threw you a $25,000 party and now this family is under attack. Sign the paper so I can save our lives." Aaliyah stood up, her jaw set with an iron resolve she certainly did not inherit from them. "You are lying. You just want his money. You literally just told the world he was dead." Courtney let out a frustrated scream, snatched Aaliyah's smartphone right out of her hands, and stormed out of the room. Tyson pulled the door shut behind him, and Aaliyah heard the heavy metallic click of the exterior lock sliding into place. "You stay in there until you pick up that pen," Courtney shouted through the thick wood. Aaliyah did not cry or panic as the heavy footsteps receded down the hallway. She simply sat back down on the edge of her bed, her mind drifting to the one person in this family who actually understood her. While Tyson and Courtney spent their weekends attending elite galas and obsessing over their social media influence, Aaliyah had always sought refuge in her grandfather's quiet, steady presence. She had never cared about the designer dresses or the country club memberships. Her absolute favorite memories were the long, quiet Saturday afternoons she spent in Gideon's cracked concrete driveway. Her hands would be covered in thick black engine grease as she held a heavy iron flashlight, watching her grandfather patiently rebuild the transmission of his rusted Ford pickup. He never rushed. He never yelled. He carefully explained how every single gear and valve worked together to move something massive forward. He taught her the profound difference between price and value. He taught her that rust could easily be sanded away with hard work, but a rotten, selfish core could never be fixed. She loved the man with dirt under his fingernails who built things that lasted. That unbreakable bond was her impenetrable shield against her parents' toxic, suffocating vanity. Aaliyah knew her grandfather was not just some confused, fragile old man wandering the streets. She had watched the local news reports and heard her parents screaming about the body in the morgue. But her intuition told her it was all a massive fabricated lie. Gideon was a master of details, a man who planned 10 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He would never just wander off and die in an alleyway. Aaliyah walked over to her closet, pushed aside a row of expensive designer shoes she rarely wore, and reached into a small shoebox hidden in the back corner. She pulled out an old, battered smartphone. It was a prepaid burner device Gideon had secretly given her a year ago for emergencies, completely disconnected from her parents' invasive family data plan. She powered it on, watching the cracked screen flicker to life. She opened the messaging application and typed in Gideon's old phone number, the one Tyson confidently claimed was disconnected and dead. High above the city, inside the silent, secure walls of my penthouse, my encrypted primary tablet suddenly chimed with a distinct, urgent notification tone. It was a message arriving on the ghost line I had maintained specifically for this purpose. I set down my coffee mug and picked up the device. The text message glowed brightly against the dark screen. "Grandpa, I know you are not dead. I know you are out there somewhere. Mom and Dad are completely losing their minds over some corporate trust fund. They locked me in my bedroom and are trying to force me to sign away my legal rights to your estate. I am scared of what Dad might do. He looks desperate. Please tell me you are okay. What should I do? I read the message twice, feeling a sudden violent shift in the atmosphere of the room. The cold, calculated amusement I felt while dismantling Tyson's financial life instantly evaporated. It was replaced by a fierce burning and absolute protective rage. I was perfectly content to sit in my ivory tower and watch Tyson and Courtney burn in the fires of their own manufactured greed. I was willing to let the Shadow Syndicate tear down their fake empire brick by brick. But involving Aaliyah was a fatal mistake. Terrorizing an innocent 16-year-old girl who actually loved me, locking her in a room to extort her inheritance, crossed the absolute final boundary of my patience. My war had just abruptly shifted from a corporate sabotage operation to a highly volatile rescue mission. I could no longer remain a passive observer pulling strings from behind a digital curtain. I had to intervene directly. I had to extract my granddaughter from that toxic, collapsing environment before Tyson's violent creditors came knocking on their front door. I sat down at my heavy mahogany desk, my fingers hovering over the glowing digital keyboard. I needed to give her a secure extraction point, a place where Dominic and I could intercept her safely and bring her back to the penthouse. I quickly typed out my response. I am safe. Do not sign a single document. Keep your door locked. Get out through your ground floor window tonight after they go to sleep. Meet me tomorrow at exactly 12 noon at the old diner on 5th Street. I hit the send button, watching the encrypted data packet fly across the secure network. But the very second the message successfully delivered, the secondary security monitor mounted on the wall above my desk flashed a bright, blinding yellow warning. Dominic's elite counter-surveillance software, which continuously monitored all network traffic interacting with my ghost lines, had instantly intercepted a highly malicious anomaly. The warning detailed a simultaneous data clone originating from Aaliyah's network. Tyson had not just confiscated his daughter's primary cell phone in a fit of rage. He had previously paid to install military-grade invisible mirroring software across her entire cloud account and domestic wireless router. Every single keystroke, every application launched, and every text message sent or received by any device connected to that specific network was being silently and automatically forwarded directly to Tyson's personal laptop. I stared at the glaring yellow alert on the monitor as the grim reality of the situation rapidly set in. Tyson was sitting in his living room right now. He was staring at his laptop screen. He was reading the exact text message I had just sent to his daughter. Tyson now knew for an absolute fact that his father was completely alive. He knew the body in the morgue was a stranger. And most dangerously, he knew the exact time and precise location where I planned to meet my vulnerable granddaughter tomorrow afternoon. It was a digital ambush. He had the perfect opportunity to corner me. But instead of panicking, I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, lethal smile forming on my lips. If my son wanted a physical confrontation, I would gladly give him one. I tapped the intercom button on my massive mahogany desk, connecting directly to Dominic on a secure channel. I gave him the precise coordinates of the diner and a very specific set of extraction instructions. I had absolutely no intention of walking into a public space surrounded by whatever cheap, violent muscle my son managed to scrape together on such short notice. Instead, I was going to use his own digital arrogance against him. Aaliyah followed my prior instructions perfectly. She slipped out of her ground floor bedroom window long before the sun came up, navigating the quiet suburban streets on foot until she reached the rundown diner on 5th Street. She sat in a booth near the back, nervously sipping a glass of ice water, waiting for the fragile, helpless grandfather she thought she needed to protect. But I was miles away, secure in my penthouse. Exactly 10 minutes before noon, the heavy metal back door of the diner kitchen swung open. Dominic slipped through the service corridor entirely unnoticed by the busy waitstaff, weaving his way silently to Aaliyah's booth. He flashed the secure identification badge I had provided him and gently escorted her out through the rear loading dock just as Tyson's vehicles began circling the front block. He ushered her into a heavily tinted armored sedan and drove her safely to Jonathan Pierce's fortified private residence. She was completely out of harm's way before Tyson even put his vehicle in park. Dominic was not a standard private investigator who spent his days snapping blurry photos of cheating spouses through cheap motel windows. He was a highly trained elite operative, a former specialist in international corporate espionage, who had spent over a decade extracting high-value targets from hostile corporate environments overseas. When Lorraine and I first began acquiring massive commercial logistics hubs, we quickly learned that the corporate world was just a polished, heavily funded version of trench warfare. We needed a ghost. We needed someone who could dismantle our competitors' surveillance, secure our digital perimeters, and execute flawless extractions without leaving a single fingerprint behind. Dominic was a phantom who lived entirely off the grid, and I paid him a staggering annual retainer to ensure my family remained completely untouchable. Tyson's clumsy, commercially available spyware and his desperate reliance on street-level thugs were absolute child's play for a man with Dominic's lethal background. Tyson truly thought he was orchestrating a brilliant tactical ambush. He did not realize he was playing checkers against a grandmaster who had already cleared the entire board. At exactly 12 noon, 3 black SUVs aggressively swerved into the parking lot of the diner, their heavy tires screeching loudly against the cracked asphalt. The live feed from the security cameras Dominic had discreetly hacked into earlier that morning streamed perfectly onto my penthouse monitors. Tyson burst out of the lead vehicle, followed closely by 4 massive, deeply intimidating men. These were not cheap private detectives or local security guards. These were seasoned enforcers from Viktor Romanov's Shadow Syndicate. Tyson had actually brought the violent loan sharks he owed $500,000 to, promising them that the old man who owned their collateral would be sitting right there, ready to sign away the deed to his house. Tyson marched toward the front entrance, his chest puffed out with a manufactured, desperate bravado. He kicked the glass door open, shattering the quiet lunchtime atmosphere. The few patrons sitting in the booths gasped, shrinking back into their seats as the thugs fanned out aggressively, blocking all the exits. Tyson stormed down the center aisle, his eyes scanning the vinyl booths with frantic, panicked intensity. He marched straight to the back corner where Aaliyah was supposed to be sitting with me. But the booth was completely empty. There was no runaway daughter. There was no senile old man holding a pen. The only thing sitting on the worn laminate table was a single untouched cup of black coffee and a small white envelope with Tyson's name handwritten clearly on the front. Tyson stared at the empty seat, his face contorting from aggressive confidence into absolute, unadulterated horror. He grabbed the envelope with shaking hands and ripped it open. Inside was a crisp $100 bill. The exact same bill he had shoved into my chest at the country club just 48 hours ago. The message was unmistakable. I had been there, I had taken his daughter, and I had left him with the exact same pathetic currency he thought my dignity was worth. One of the syndicate enforcers stepped forward, grabbing Tyson roughly by the shoulder of his expensive tailored jacket. "You said the old man was going to be here," the enforcer growled, his voice thick and menacing, echoing through the silent diner. "You said we were getting the signature for the house right now. Where is the collateral, Tyson?" Tyson stammered, his eyes darting wildly around the room, physically trembling under the massive thug's iron grip. "I do not know." Tyson choked out sweat pouring down his forehead. He was supposed to be here. He sent a text message. I tracked the phone. The enforcer shoved him hard against the edge of the wooden table, knocking the coffee cup to the floor. "Romanov is done waiting for signatures from dead men and ghosts," the thug snapped. "You have 24 hours to produce the deed, or we are taking your cars, your company, and your kneecaps." The thugs turned and marched out of the diner, leaving Tyson hyperventilating in the middle of the aisle, while terrified waitstaff watched from behind the counter. He was completely out of options. He had no house to leverage, no father to extort, no daughter to manipulate, and a violent mob breathing down his neck. He pulled out his phone, frantically scrolling through his contacts, desperate to find anyone who could loan him the cash. Before he could press dial, his phone erupted with a harsh, blaring ringtone. It was an incoming call from a highly restricted encrypted number. The caller identification simply read, "Vanguard Holdings Executive Office." Tyson's eyes widened in sheer terror. This was the anonymous angel investor, the massive corporate entity that had funded his entire lavish lifestyle. He answered the call with violently shaking hands, holding the phone tightly to his ear. "Hello," Tyson breathed out, his voice cracking with utter desperation. I was sitting at my mahogany desk speaking into a high-grade voice modulation microphone that completely altered my vocal pitch into a deep, unrecognizable mechanical baritone. "Tyson," I said coldly, "my compliance team just finalized a forensic audit of your corporate accounts. You have committed massive, unpardonable financial fraud. You illegally leveraged our seed capital to fund a fraudulent loan with a criminal syndicate." Tyson gasped loudly, unable to form a single coherent word. He was completely paralyzed. "This constitutes an egregious breach of your investment contract," I continued, my modulated voice echoing in his ear like a death sentence. "We are executing an immediate hostile recall of all deployed assets. You are hereby ordered to repay the entire $2 million principal investment by the end of business today. If the funds do not clear our accounts by 5 o'clock, we will seize your entire company, liquidate your personal assets, and forward your fraudulent activities directly to the federal authorities. Have a highly productive afternoon." I terminated the connection, leaving my son standing in an empty diner holding a silent phone, staring directly into the abyss of his own absolute destruction. Tyson stumbled out of the diner and practically fell into the driver's seat of his remaining luxury vehicle. His lungs burned as he gasped for air, his chest heaving under his sweat-ruined tailored shirt. He was a dead man walking if he did not generate a massive amount of cash immediately. He drove recklessly across town, running red lights until he reached a high-end watch broker he frequently used to flaunt his wealth. He slammed a velvet box containing 3 custom Rolexes and a rare Patek Philippe onto the glass counter, demanding an immediate cash buyout. The broker, a man who usually greeted Tyson with champagne and overwhelming flattery, took one look at his frantic state and quietly ran the serial numbers through a financial database. The broker slid the box back across the counter, shaking his head. He informed Tyson that a massive corporate lien had just been slapped on his entire financial portfolio by Vanguard Holdings. Every physical asset purchased under his name or his company was legally frozen pending a high-level fraud investigation. Tyson screamed, snatching the watches and running back to his vehicle. He dialed his exotic car dealership, desperately trying to liquidate his 2 other sports cars. The dealership manager coldly informed him that the bank had already issued repossession orders due to the overarching corporate freeze. Tyson was completely cornered. The wealth he had paraded for years was nothing but a fragile illusion chained to a master he could no longer control. He had no cash, no credit, and absolutely nothing of value that he could legally sell. Watching him panic through the security feeds brought a specific, deeply painful memory to the surface of my mind. 10 years ago, long before Vanguard Holdings existed as a massive corporate entity, Tyson came to me begging for seed money. Lorraine and I had just finished a grueling warehouse renovation, and we had significant cash on hand. Tyson swore he needed the funds for software development and server space to launch his brilliant startup. I wrote him a personal check for $75,000, draining a substantial portion of our hard-earned liquid savings. 2 weeks later, he pulled into my cracked concrete driveway, not with a business plan, but in a brand new, fully loaded sports car. When I confronted him about squandering our family investment, he laughed right in my face. He told me that in his world, perception was reality. He said an old railroad worker could never understand the importance of modern corporate branding. He never paid back a single dime of that initial loan. He effectively stole from his own parents to fund his blinding vanity. That was the exact moment Lorraine and I realized our son was fundamentally broken. Now the superficial armor he bought with other people's money was actively choking him to death. Tyson returned to his leased mansion looking like a man walking directly to his own execution. He dragged his feet across the polished marble foyer, his custom suit stained with sweat and sheer terror. Courtney was waiting in the expansive living room, frantically refreshing her social media accounts, utterly obsessed with the absolute destruction of her public image. She looked up expecting Tyson to hand her a magical solution. Instead, he collapsed onto the expensive modern sofa and buried his face in his hands. He confessed everything. He told her about the frozen corporate accounts, the violent syndicate demanding $500,000, the missing old man, and the absolute final nail in the coffin. Vanguard Holdings was seizing his company and demanding $2 million by the end of the business day. Courtney did not offer a single word of comfort. She did not kneel beside her husband to formulate a survival plan or offer emotional support. The very second she realized the money was entirely gone and the mob was involved, her manufactured affection evaporated instantly. Her survival instinct, honed by years of selfish social climbing, kicked into high gear. She told Tyson she was going upstairs to take a long shower and clear her head so they could figure things out. Instead, Courtney locked herself inside their massive master bathroom. She turned the shower on full blast to mask the sound of her voice. She pulled out her cell phone and immediately dialed the number of the most aggressive cutthroat divorce attorney in the city. She paced the tiled floor, her voice a sharp, calculating whisper. Dominic, who had maintained unbroken access to her device since the country club incident, routed the live audio feed directly into my penthouse office. I listened as Courtney ruthlessly outlined her exit strategy. She told the attorney that her husband was about to be indicted for massive financial fraud and was currently being hunted by a ruthless criminal syndicate. She explicitly instructed the lawyer to draft emergency divorce papers and file for immediate sole custody of Aaliyah. She wanted to establish an ironclad legal narrative that she was completely ignorant of Tyson's illegal business dealings. Most disgustingly, she asked the lawyer how quickly she could quietly liquidate her expensive jewelry collection and funnel the remaining cash from their joint checking account into an untraceable offshore shell before the federal authorities froze their personal assets. She was entirely prepared to throw the father of her child to the wolves, the courts, and the mob just to ensure she could maintain a fraction of her luxurious lifestyle. She did not care if Tyson ended up in a federal prison or at the bottom of a river as long as her designer bags and personal freedom were fully secured. It was a staggering display of absolute disloyalty. They truly deserved each other. I sat in my leather chair listening to the rushing water of Courtney's shower through the audio feed. I could have simply handed this recording over to Jonathan Pierce to use in our eventual legal barrage, but I had no desire to wait for the slow grind of the judicial system. I wanted to break the very foundation of their toxic partnership right now. I downloaded the crisp, clear audio file of Courtney's conversation with the divorce lawyer. I opened an encrypted messaging channel and sent the file directly to Tyson's phone with a simple subject line that read, "Listen carefully." Down in the living room, Tyson's phone chimed. He picked it up with trembling hands, probably expecting another death threat from the syndicate. Instead, he saw an anonymous audio file. He pressed play. The pristine sound of his wife's voice plotting his total financial ruin and absolute abandonment echoed loudly through the silent, empty mansion. I watched the security feed as Tyson's expression morphed from pure terror into a blind, all-consuming rage. The ultimate betrayal shattered whatever small shred of sanity he had left. He dropped the phone onto the cushion, his fists clenching so tight his knuckles turned bone white. He marched up the grand, sweeping staircase, each heavy footstep echoing with violent intent. He reached the master bedroom, bypassed the brass door handle, and kicked the heavy bathroom door open with a deafening crash. Courtney screamed over the sound of the running water. Tyson stood in the doorway, his chest heaving, the audio file now playing on loop from the phone he had picked back up. The illusion of their perfect high society marriage was officially dead. The war had just moved inside their own walls, and I had a front row seat to the absolute carnage. Tyson stood in the doorway of the master bathroom with the audio file echoing loudly off the marble walls. The sound of his wife's voice coldly planning his absolute ruin played on a continuous loop. Courtney stepped out of the glass shower enclosure, wrapping a thick white towel around her body. She froze for a fraction of a second when she saw the murderous rage contorting her husband's face. But Courtney did not apologize. She did not fall to her knees and beg for forgiveness. Instead, the polished high society mask she wore for the public completely dissolved, revealing the ugly, venomous core beneath. She stepped forward, her eyes narrowing with pure malice, and went immediately on the offensive. She unleashed a torrent of vile, degrading insults that targeted the very foundation of Tyson's existence. She screamed that she had wasted the best years of her life playing house with a pathetic fraud who could not even run a legitimate business. Her words grew increasingly darker, crossing into explicitly racist territory. She mocked his working-class black heritage, calling him a cheap street hustler playing dress-up in a world where he never truly belonged. She told him that she only tolerated his background, his skin, and his embarrassing family because she believed he possessed genuine wealth. Now that the money was an illusion, she declared him absolutely worthless, nothing more than the dirty manual laborer his father was. The sheer cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. She stripped away every ounce of his fabricated pride, leaving him completely naked in his failure. Sitting in my penthouse, watching the live security feed, I felt a sudden profound ache in my chest. I despised what my son had become. I was actively engineering his financial destruction. But hearing that woman hurl those specific, deeply prejudiced slurs at my own flesh and blood brought a physical pain I did not anticipate. I had spent my entire life fighting against that exact brand of quiet structural racism. Lorraine and I built an empire so our son would never have to bow his head to people who looked at him with that inherent disgusting superiority. But the true tragedy was not Courtney's bigotry. It was Tyson's reaction to it. He did not defend his heritage. He did not defend his parents who sacrificed everything for his education. He did not even defend his own basic human dignity. He just stood there, shoulders slumped, utterly broken by a woman who valued him less than the designer shoes in her closet. His cowardice was absolute. He had traded his soul for access to a world that fundamentally despised him, and now he was paying the ultimate humiliating price. Tyson finally found his voice, raising a shaking finger at his wife. He threatened to throw her out into the street with absolutely nothing. He screamed that he would report her to the police for attempting to steal from his accounts and kidnap his daughter. Courtney threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed loudly through the bathroom. She walked over to her vanity mirror, calmly applying expensive facial cream as if they were discussing the weather. She told him to go ahead and call the authorities. She revealed that over the past 2 years, she had meticulously gathered digital copies of every single fraudulent financial document he had ever signed. She had the forged loan applications, the illegal corporate transfers, and the falsified tax returns safely secured in an encrypted cloud server. She looked at him through the reflection in the mirror and delivered her counter-threat with surgical precision. If Tyson tried to cut her off or retaliate, she would personally hand the entire digital dossier over to the federal authorities and the executives at Vanguard Holdings in exchange for full legal immunity. Tyson went completely rigid. The color drained from his already pale face. He realized instantly that he was completely trapped. His wife held the absolute trump card, and she would not hesitate to send him to a federal penitentiary to save her own skin. They stood amidst the total wreckage of their marriage, two parasites realizing that mutual assured destruction was imminent. The silence in the room was thick and toxic. Then Courtney's survival instinct pivoted sharply. She turned around and proposed a temporary, highly calculated truce. She told Tyson they could hate each other later, but right now they needed to execute one final massive grift to save both of their lives. She brought up the Vanguard Legacy Trust, the impenetrable corporate wall protecting my entire estate. Tyson reminded her bitterly that the bank manager had clearly stated the trust was legally binding and untouchable. Courtney smiled a wicked, predatory grin that made my blood run cold. She argued that a trust was only legally binding if the person who created it was of sound mind at the time of its inception. She laid out a brilliant, completely illegal strategy. If they could definitively prove to a probate judge that Gideon was legally incompetent and suffering from severe cognitive decline 10 years ago, when the trust was formed, the court would invalidate the entire document. The trust would be completely nullified. All the properties, the liquid assets, and the heavy investment portfolios would immediately revert back to the primary estate. And since the world now officially recognized Gideon as deceased Tyson as the sole next of kin, would automatically inherit everything. They could pay off the shadow syndicate, settle the $2 million corporate debt with Vanguard Holdings, and still have millions left over to divide evenly in a clean, quiet divorce. Tyson stared at her, his mind struggling to process the sheer audacity of the plan. He asked her how they could possibly convince a federal judge that a man who ran a logistics empire was clinically insane a full decade ago. They needed ironclad historical medical records, and they had absolutely none. Courtney walked over to her closet and pulled down a hidden lockbox from the top shelf. She opened it to reveal thick stacks of emergency cash she had been secretly skimming from his accounts for years. She told Tyson that medical records could be bought just like anything else in their corrupt world. She revealed she had a very close connection with a high society psychiatrist named Dr. Vance. Dr. Vance was famous for prescribing whatever heavy medication wealthy housewives demanded, but Courtney knew his dark secret. She knew for a fact that Dr. Vance was drowning in severe, undisclosed gambling debts and was desperate for a financial lifeline. She grabbed $50,000 in crisp $100 bills and shoved them into a designer leather bag. She told Tyson they were going to drive directly to the doctor's private clinic right now. They were going to use the cash to bribe Dr. Vance into writing a comprehensive, backdated medical evaluation, diagnosing Gideon with early-onset, highly aggressive dementia starting exactly 15 years ago. It would be the ultimate forgery, the final key to unlocking a massive fortune. I watched the high-definition security feed as they hastily agreed to the criminal pact, utterly convinced of their own genius. They zipped up their coats and rushed out the door to buy a medical professional, completely unaware that Dominic and I were documenting every single syllable of their conspiracy, ready and waiting to let them walk directly into a federal courtroom to commit perjury on the public record. The heavy oak doors of the county probate courthouse swung open 3 days later, ushering in an atmosphere thick with manufactured grief and high-stakes deception. The courtroom was an imposing chamber of polished mahogany and absolute silence designed to intimidate anyone who dared to lie under oath. Tyson and Courtney walked down the center aisle, arm in arm, wearing matching black suits, their heads bowed in a flawless performance of sorrow. They took their seats at the plaintiff's table, accompanied by a high-priced litigator they had undoubtedly hired on credit. Across the aisle, sitting entirely alone at the defense table, was Jonathan Pierce. He was there acting as the sole legal representative and primary executor of the Vanguard Legacy Trust. Pierce did not shuffle papers. He did not nervously adjust his tie. He sat perfectly still, his hands folded neatly in front of him, radiating the kind of absolute chilling confidence that only comes from knowing you hold every single winning card in the deck. The air in the room was suffocatingly tense. Tyson cast a nervous glance across the aisle, expecting to see a team of frantic corporate lawyers scrambling to defend my estate. Instead, he saw one man staring back at him with the predatory calmness of a hunter watching a deer step directly into a snare. The judge, a stern, no-nonsense woman named Honorable Davis, entered the chamber and took her seat high above the floor. She slammed her heavy wooden gavel down, officially calling the emergency evidentiary hearing to order. Jonathan Pierce was an absolute apex predator in the legal world. He was a seasoned veteran of hostile corporate takeovers, international asset protection, and high-stakes litigation that dealt in billions rather than thousands. He was an old wolf in a tailored suit who had built his fearsome reputation by dismantling arrogant executives and exposing corporate fraud with surgical, devastating precision. A petty fraudulent probate dispute orchestrated by a desperate startup founder and his materialistic wife was entirely beneath his usual pay grade. But Pierce was fiercely loyal to Lorraine and me. He had helped us structure the very trust Tyson was currently attempting to destroy. Sitting in that courtroom, Pierce was not just doing his job, he was actively enjoying the impending slaughter. He had spent the entire weekend reviewing Dominic's surveillance footage, listening to the audio files of Tyson and Courtney bribing a medical professional. He possessed a digital vault filled with undeniable high-definition proof of Tyson's profound criminality. Pierce relished the quiet moments before a total legal annihilation. He allowed Tyson's overpriced lawyer to lay out the opening arguments, listening with a faint, almost imperceptible smirk as the opposing counsel confidently spun a web of absolute fiction. Tyson's attorney stood up and addressed Judge Davis with a theatrical cadence. He painted a tragic, deeply fabricated picture of a beloved patriarch who had slowly lost his mind to the cruel ravages of dementia. He claimed that 15 years ago, my cognitive functions began to aggressively deteriorate, rendering me completely incapable of understanding complex legal documents. Therefore, he argued the Vanguard Legacy Trust I established 10 years ago was inherently invalid, the product of a compromised mind, and should be immediately nullified so my grieving son could rightfully claim his inheritance. To solidify this absolute lie, Tyson took the stand. He produced a few remarkably realistic tears, his voice cracking perfectly as he recounted fictional stories of my supposed memory loss. He spoke about how hard it was to watch his brilliant father forget his own name, conveniently ignoring the fact that during that exact timeline, I was personally funding his entire lifestyle and bailing him out of his relentless financial failures. Courtney sat in the gallery, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, playing the supportive, devastated wife to absolute perfection. They were executing their script flawlessly. Then came their ultimate weapon. The plaintiff's attorney called Dr. Vance to the witness stand. The prominent high society psychiatrist walked to the front of the room, placed his right hand on the Holy Bible, and swore a binding oath before the court to tell the whole truth. He sat down, adjusted his expensive glasses, and began to commit blatant, heavily compensated perjury. Dr. Vance testified that I had been a private patient of his for over 2 decades. He presented a thick, meticulously forged medical file detailing a long, tragic history of aggressive, early-onset dementia. He looked directly at the judge and confidently stated that 15 years ago I had suffered a catastrophic mental decline. He claimed I suffered from severe paranoia hallucinations and a total inability to grasp financial realities. He definitively declared that I was legally and medically incompetent at the exact moment the Vanguard Legacy Trust was signed and sealed. He answered every question with the polished authority of a seasoned medical professional, ensuring his clinical vocabulary left no room for doubt. For $50,000 in illicit cash, a licensed medical doctor was actively defrauding a federal court and attempting to steal a multi-million-dollar estate. Judge Davis listened intently, reviewing the forged medical file with a deep, sympathetic frown. The evidence looked absolutely ironclad. The testimony was incredibly compelling. Tyson and Courtney exchanged a rapid, subtle glance of pure, unrestrained victory. They genuinely thought they had won. They believed the trust was seconds away from being shattered, the Shadow Syndicate would be paid, and their luxurious lives would be perfectly restored. Judge Davis stacked the medical files neatly on her desk and looked down at Jonathan Pierce. The defense had not objected a single time during the entire proceeding. Pierce had allowed them to build their massive house of lies without offering a shred of resistance. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Davis said, her voice echoing in the quiet chamber. "The plaintiffs have presented overwhelming medical and familial evidence indicating your client was not of sound mind when this trust was executed. The court is heavily inclined to grant the petition to nullify the trust in its entirety and revert all assets to the sole surviving heir. Do you have any final arguments or witnesses to present before I issue my official ruling?" Tyson leaned back in his chair, a smug, arrogant grin breaking through his grieving facade. Courtney practically vibrated with excitement in the front row. They were literally seconds away from stealing my entire empire. Jonathan Pierce slowly stood up, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with absolute agonizing deliberation. He looked at Tyson, then at Dr. Vance, and finally up at the judge. His faint smirk bloomed into a full, predatory smile. "Your Honor," Pierce said, his voice ringing out clear and sharp, cutting through the tension in the room like a perfectly sharpened blade. "The defense does not dispute the physical documentation presented by the plaintiffs today. We merely dispute the reality in which it exists. We have only one witness to call, someone who can speak with absolute undeniable authority regarding the mental capacity of the trust founder." Judge Davis frowned slightly, adjusting her glasses. "And who exactly is this witness, Mr. Pierce?" Pierce turned his head toward the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom. "I request the court to call the final witness," Pierce announced loudly, "the Chief Executive Officer of the Vanguard Legacy Trust." The heavy wooden doors at the back of the courtroom slowly clicked unlatched, and the brass handles began to turn. The heavy wooden doors pushed open with a slow, deliberate weight that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. I stepped over the threshold and into the hushed mahogany chamber. The rhythmic, authoritative click of my polished leather Oxfords against the hardwood floor echoed like a countdown. I did not pause. I did not hesitate. I kept my gaze locked squarely on the front of the room, my expression carved from absolute ice. The collective gasp that sucked the air out of the courtroom was instantaneous. Tyson's smug, arrogant grin vanished so violently it looked as though he had been physically struck across the jaw. He gripped the edge of the plaintiff's table, his knuckles turning stark white, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. Beside him, Courtney stopped breathing entirely. The crumpled tissue she had been using to fake her tears slipped from her trembling fingers and floated to the floor. She stared at me with wide, bloodshot eyes, her pristine socialite mask instantly replaced by the raw, naked terror of a cornered animal recognizing its predator. On the witness stand, Dr. Vance physically recoiled, pressing his back hard against the wooden chair as if trying to merge with the furniture and disappear completely. The entire courtroom remained frozen in a state of absolute, suffocating shock. I was the ghost they had confidently buried, returning to the world of the living, not to haunt them, but to completely dismantle them. They were staring at a man they simply did not recognize. For 5 long years, they had actively chosen to see a fragile, broken relic of the working class. They saw the faded thrift store suits, the calloused hands, and the rusted 1998 Ford pickup. They believed I was a pathetic, uneducated laborer who had merely stumbled through life. But the man walking down the center aisle of the federal courthouse was the true architect of the Vanguard Legacy Trust. I wore my bespoke $5,000 charcoal suit that draped perfectly across my broad shoulders. The heavy platinum watch caught the fluorescent light signaling wealth that required absolutely no validation. My posture was rigid, my chin held high with the undeniable quiet authority of a corporate titan who had spent decades ruthlessly conquering the commercial logistics sector. The deceptive layer of poverty I had worn to test my son's morality was completely stripped away, revealing the uncompromising billionaire underneath. I was no longer the humble father desperate for his son's affection. I was the absolute executioner of their fake empire, and I looked every inch the part. The silence in the room stretched on heavy and suffocating as the reality of my physical presence shattered their meticulously crafted narrative of a sick, helpless victim. Tyson's legs completely gave out beneath him. He collapsed heavily back into his wooden chair, his chest heaving as he struggled to pull oxygen into his lungs. He looked at my immaculate suit, my sharp grooming, and the terrifyingly calm expression on my face, and the horrific reality of his situation finally registered in his hollow mind. He had stood in a county morgue, looked down at the lifeless face of a complete stranger, and officially signed his name to a legal document declaring that man was his father. He had filed expedited probate paperwork based on a massive premeditated lie, committing severe federal fraud in the process. The police missing persons report, the morgue identification, the entire chain of events flashed before his eyes as a guaranteed prison sentence. Now the very man he had legally pronounced dead was walking toward him in a tailored suit, entirely alive and vibrating with lethal intent. Tyson realized in an instant that I knew everything. He knew that I had orchestrated the empty house, the fake pill bottle, and the entire digital trap he had so eagerly sprinted into. His eyes filled with hot, panicked tears, but I did not offer him a single glance of pity. I walked right past the plaintiff's table without even acknowledging his pathetic, trembling existence. I did not look at Courtney, who was now hyperventilating. Her manicured hands gripped her perfectly styled hair in pure, unfiltered disbelief as she watched her carefully plotted multi-million-dollar theft evaporate into thin air, leaving her completely exposed to criminal liability. My attention shifted entirely to the witness stand. Dr. Vance was sweating profusely, the expensive collar of his dress shirt suddenly looking far too tight around his neck. The confident, articulate medical expert who had just boldly lied under oath a minute ago was now visibly shaking. He knew exactly what the penalty was for committing blatant perjury in a federal court, especially when attempting to defraud a massive corporate trust. His eyes darted toward the heavy oak exit doors, calculating a desperate escape route that simply did not exist because armed federal marshals would soon be waiting. I stopped directly in front of the judge's bench, turning my body just enough to face the disgraced psychiatrist. "Good morning, Dr. Vance," I said, my voice rich, deep, and echoing clearly across the silent courtroom. "It is truly a medical miracle to see you today, considering I have never stepped foot inside your private clinic in my entire life, nor have I ever had the displeasure of making your acquaintance until this very moment." Vance opened his mouth to speak, but only a pathetic, raspy squeak escaped his throat. He looked desperately toward Tyson's attorney, pleading for an objection, but the high-priced litigator was already leaning away from his own clients, frantically packing his legal briefs into his briefcase, realizing he had just been used to facilitate a massive federal crime. Judge Davis stared down at me from her elevated bench, her stern eyes widening in profound shock before narrowing into a sharp judicial fury. She looked from me to Jonathan Pierce and then directly at the trembling doctor on the stand. "Mr. Pierce," Judge Davis said, her voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register, "I strongly suggest you explain exactly what is happening in my courtroom before I order the bailiff to lock the doors and start detaining people for criminal contempt." Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, his predatory smile perfectly intact. He handed me a thick, sealed leather portfolio. I unclasped the binding and extracted 2 pristine stacks of documents, sliding them respectfully across the polished wood of the judge's bench. "Your Honor," I stated clearly, projecting my voice so every single syllable reached my son sitting paralyzed behind me. "The first stack contains my comprehensive, genuine medical records. They include sworn notarized affidavits from 3 independent board-certified neurologists who evaluated me less than 48 hours ago. They definitively conclude that I possess the cognitive function of a man half my age, completely devoid of any dementia or mental incapacity." Judge Davis rapidly scanned the authenticated medical seals, her expression darkening with every passing second. "And the second stack of documents," I continued, keeping my eyes locked on the judge, "is a certified financial trace provided by my elite private intelligence team. It contains high-definition surveillance photographs and a forensic accounting footprint detailing a specific highly illegal transaction executed exactly 3 days ago. It documents a direct cash transfer of exactly $50,000 pulled from a hidden lockbox in my son's rented mansion and deposited directly into a clandestine offshore gambling account controlled exclusively by Dr. Vance to cover his mounting syndicate debts. It is the exact quantifiable price my family paid to purchase a fraudulent medical diagnosis and commit perjury in your courtroom. Judge Davis did not speak for a long time. The heavy silence in the courtroom was absolute, broken only by the sharp rustle of thick paper as she meticulously reviewed the certified bank transfers and the time-stamped security photographs I had provided. Her eyes darted rapidly across the undeniable proof, the absolute destruction of a medical professional's career neatly bound in a leather folder. When she finally looked up from the documents, her face was a terrifying mask of pure judicial wrath. She slammed her wooden gavel down onto the sounding block so hard the sharp crack echoed off the high ceilings like a gunshot. She immediately ordered the court bailiffs to secure all exits. 2 armed deputies marched directly toward the witness stand, their heavy boots thudding against the floorboards. Dr. Vance did not even try to run or defend his fabricated diagnosis. He held his hands out, his entire body trembling violently as the cold steel handcuffs snapped tightly around his wrists. The distinguished high society psychiatrist was loudly read his rights and forcefully escorted out the side door, his pristine reputation and his freedom completely eradicated in a matter of seconds. Judge Davis turned her furious, unyielding gaze toward Tyson and Courtney. She declared the emergency petition for guardianship entirely dismissed with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, she announced she was forwarding the entire transcript of this hearing, along with my extensive evidence portfolio, directly to the district attorney's office for immediate criminal prosecution regarding perjury, fraud, and the malicious falsification of official medical records. The elaborate legal trap Tyson had built to cage me had just slammed shut directly on his own neck. I stood perfectly still in the center of the courtroom, watching the armed deputies march the disgraced doctor out of the chamber. I felt absolutely no pity for anyone involved. Over the grueling decades I spent building a massive commercial logistics empire from the ground up, I operated under one uncompromising, ironclad principle. I could tolerate a bad business decision. I could negotiate with aggressive, hostile competitors. I could even forgive a massive miscalculation that cost my company millions of dollars in revenue. But the very second a person crossed the line into premeditated fraud, they ceased to exist in my world. Lorraine and I built our massive fortune on a foundation of absolute trust and brutal, unforgiving honesty. We despised thieves, whether they wore cheap ski masks in a dark alley or $5,000 tailored suits in a corporate boardroom. Tyson had not just tried to steal my money to fund his vanity. He had attempted to steal my fundamental human autonomy. He had paid a corrupt medical professional to legally erase my voice and lock me away in a facility. In the ruthless world of high-stakes business, you do not merely defeat a fraudster, you completely salt the earth beneath their feet, so absolutely nothing they plant can ever grow again. I was applying that exact same corporate execution to my own flesh and blood. The courtroom began to empty, leaving only the heavy, suffocating silence of absolute ruin. Tyson's highly paid attorney had already vanished, sprinting down the marble hallway the moment the handcuffs came out, terrified of being implicated in a sprawling federal conspiracy. Tyson stood up from the plaintiff's table, his legs unsteady, his chest heaving with erratic, panicked breaths. He looked at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, desperately searching for a way to salvage even a microscopic fraction of his shattered ego. The very real threat of federal prison was looming over him. The violent shadow syndicate was actively hunting him, and the massive inheritance he thought he had secured was completely unreachable behind my trust. Yet in the face of total apocalyptic failure, his blinding vanity refused to let him surrender. He straightened his ruined posture violently, tugging at the lapels of his jacket in a pathetic attempt to regain some semblance of authority. He pointed a shaking finger at me, his voice echoing loudly in the nearly empty chamber. "Keep your miserable trust fund," Tyson shouted, his tone a fragile, chaotic mix of aggressive bravado and underlying terror. "I do not need a single dime of your old money. You think you just beat me. You think you destroyed my life because you hid behind a team of expensive corporate lawyers. But you are nothing but a retired mechanic playing dress-up in a suit you probably rented for the afternoon. I am a tech visionary. I built a massive startup from the ground up. I have an elite team of developers, proprietary software algorithms, and a massive corporate infrastructure that spans the entire state." Courtney stood a few feet behind him, her hands covering her mouth, fully aware that his ranting was nothing but the desperate delusion of a sinking man. She knew the mob debt was still waiting, but Tyson kept going, his voice growing louder aggressively, trying to convince himself more than anyone else in the room. "My company is still here," he yelled, his face turning a deep, angry shade of red. "I have connections you cannot even comprehend. My angel investors believe in my vision. As soon as I clear up this temporary freeze on my corporate accounts, I am going to secure a brand new round of funding. I will pay off my private debts. I will rebuild my empire 10 times bigger than before, and I will do it without a single drop of your pathetic working-class blood money. You hear me? I am a self-made CEO. I do not need you. I will rebuild everything." I let him scream. I stood perfectly still with my hands clasped in front of me, letting him pour every last ounce of his fabricated pride into the silent courtroom. I wanted him to exhaust his delusions completely. When he finally ran out of breath, standing there panting and glaring at me with pure, unfiltered hatred, I let out a low, slow chuckle. It was a cold, mechanical sound that offered absolutely no warmth or paternal affection. I turned my head slightly and gave Jonathan Pierce a brief, subtle nod. Pierce smiled his signature predatory grin and reached deep into his leather briefcase. He pulled out a thick, heavily bound legal dossier stamped with a massive red corporate seal and tossed it onto the wooden table right in front of Tyson. The heavy document hit the wood with a loud, definitive thud. "Tyson," I said, my voice completely flat and devoid of any mercy, "your startup company is a colossal financial failure. Your proprietary software is worthless. Your server leases are terminated, and your elite team has been entirely liquidated as of 9 o'clock this morning." Tyson stared at the heavy document, a violent twitch developing under his left eye. "What are you talking about?" he stammered, his eyes darting frantically from the dossier to my face. I took a slow, calculated step forward, closing the distance between us, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. "You have spent the last 5 years bragging to the entire world about your brilliant anonymous angel investor." I stated each word, striking like a heavy iron hammer against his fragile reality. "You thought you hustled your way into elite venture capital. You thought you were a self-made genius who outsmarted the market." I tapped a polished fingernail against the heavy red seal on the dossier. "Open the file, Tyson. Read the name of the primary shareholder and chief executive officer." Tyson reached out with violently shaking hands and flipped open the heavy cardstock cover. His eyes scanned the bold, black text printed on the very first page, and the last remaining shred of color instantly drained from his face. His knees visibly buckled. "I am the founder and sole executive of Vanguard Holdings," I declared, my voice echoing powerfully off the mahogany walls. "I funded your fake empire to test your character, and yesterday I ordered the total hostile recall of every single deployed asset. You do not have a company anymore. You are standing right in front of your mystery investor." Tyson stared at the name on the heavy cardstock, his eyes refusing to comprehend the catastrophic reality printed in bold black ink. I did not give him a single moment to catch his breath. I outlined exactly how the destruction of his fabricated life was executed. I explained that Vanguard Holdings had not merely frozen his corporate accounts. We had triggered the hostile default clauses hidden deep within the original seed capital contracts he had blindly signed. Because he committed gross financial misconduct by forging a mortgage deed using my property, every single asset tied to his company was immediately forfeited to my holding firm. I told him about my encrypted call to Viktor Romanov. I explained how my offshore shell corporation purchased his $500,000 debt from the Shadow Syndicate at a 20% premium. I watched his jaw drop as he realized his father was now his sole uncompromising creditor. I informed him that my legal team had already filed the necessary paperwork to foreclose on the leased mansion. Repossession agents were currently towing away the luxury vehicles from his driveway, and corporate liquidators were clearing out the expensive office space he used to play pretend. He owned absolutely nothing. The designer suits on his back, the watches he tried to fence, and the very foundation of his startup now belonged exclusively to me. I had legally stripped him down to the absolute bone, leaving him with no corporate shield, no venture capital, and no shadow syndicate to cower behind. The empire he thought he built was just a fragile sandcastle, and I was the tidal wave that completely washed it away. I looked at the trembling man standing before me and felt a profound, cavernous emptiness expanding in my chest. There was no triumphant joy in this absolute victory. No father ever dreams of standing in a federal courtroom methodically destroying the life and livelihood of his own child. I remembered the little boy who used to sit on my shoulders the son Lorraine and I had poured our entire souls and wallets into raising. Stripping away his wealth, his dignity and his freedom felt like cutting off my own limb to stop a spreading lethal infection. It was agonizing, brutal, and deeply tragic, but it was absolutely necessary. Tyson had allowed his superficial greed to mutate into something monstrous. He had completely lost his humanity in the relentless pursuit of high society validation. If I walked away and allowed him to continue this destructive path without consequence, he would poison everything he touched, including the bright future of my innocent granddaughter. I had to become the ruthless executioner of his vanity. I had to break his manufactured reality down completely so that perhaps somewhere in the distant future he might learn how to rebuild himself as a decent, honest human being. The crushing silence in the courtroom was suddenly shattered by a shrill, hysterical shriek. Courtney lunged forward, her manicured hands violently pushing Tyson away from her as if he were covered in a deadly contagion. The perfectly poised socialite mask completely disintegrated, revealing a frantic, desperate opportunist scrambling to survive the wreckage of her own making. She turned her back on her husband entirely and faced Judge Davis, her voice echoing with a manic, unhinged urgency. "Your Honor!" Courtney screamed, gesturing wildly toward the man she had sworn to love. "I want an immediate expedited divorce. Right now. Put it on the official record. I have absolutely no part in his criminal activities. I knew nothing about the forged medical records, the shadow syndicate loans, or the fake corporate accounts. He lied to me. He manipulated this entire family. I am a victim of his systemic financial abuse." Tyson stared at his wife in absolute disbelief, betrayed by the very woman he had compromised his soul to impress. Courtney did not even look at him. She was entirely focused on salvaging her own luxurious lifestyle. She aggressively demanded that the court immediately sever her legal ties to Tyson and grant her 50% of their joint marital assets. She insisted that her personal jewelry collection, her designer wardrobe, and the remaining cash in their primary checking accounts be legally shielded from Vanguard Holdings in the impending federal fraud investigation. She rambled frantically about her high society status, demanding that her country club memberships remain untouched. She completely blinded herself to the fact that she was confessing to her own extreme materialism on the public record. She yelled that she refused to be dragged down into poverty by a pathetic, incompetent fraud. She threw Tyson completely to the wolves, detailing his desperate attempts to secure the illegal bridge loan and explicitly naming him as the sole architect of the entire guardianship scam. She thought that by loudly condemning him, she could magically detach herself from the sinking ship and float away on a golden lifeboat. She demanded that the judge issue an emergency protective order securing her access to the offshore accounts she had secretly established, boldly admitting to hiding marital assets right in front of a federal magistrate. Her display of pure, unfiltered greed was so overwhelming that even the court bailiff stared at her in stunned silence. She was perfectly willing to send the father of her child to a federal penitentiary for a decade if it meant she could keep a fraction of her unearned wealth. She finished her unhinged rant completely breathless, staring expectantly at the bench, fully believing her aggressive performance had secured her an elegant, wealthy escape from the catastrophic disaster she had actively helped create. Judge Davis looked down at Courtney with an expression of profound, unvarnished disgust. Before the judge could utter a single word of reprimand, Jonathan Pierce stepped forward, his polished shoes clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. He cleared his throat, drawing the attention of every single person in the room. Mrs. Courtney Pierce said, his voice dripping with a smooth, lethal professionalism. "I am afraid your request for asset division is a mathematical impossibility. While you were busy formulating your exit strategy in the hallway, my office was coordinating directly with federal financial regulators. Due to the overwhelming evidence of systemic fraud, identity theft, and attempted extortion involving a major corporate trust, the authorities have executed an emergency federal freeze on every single account associated with your name and your husband's name." Courtney froze, her eyes widening in absolute terror. Pierce smiled, delivering the final devastating blow. "Your joint checking accounts are locked. Your credit cards are zeroed out. Even the clandestine offshore account you foolishly attempted to transfer funds into yesterday afternoon has been seized by federal investigators. You possess absolutely zero liquid assets. You are, by every legal and financial definition, completely bankrupt." The reality of the situation crashed into Courtney with the force of a freight train. There would be no golden lifeboat. There would be no high society escape. She was stripped of her wealth, her status, and her future in a matter of seconds. She turned slowly to face Tyson, her face contorting into a mask of pure, vicious hatred. Without a single word of warning, she raised her hand and delivered a brutal, echoing slap directly across Tyson's face. The sharp crack rang out through the silent courtroom as Tyson stumbled backward, completely humiliated and utterly destroyed. The sharp crack of Courtney's hand striking Tyson's face shattered whatever remaining decorum existed in the federal courtroom. Tyson staggered backward, clutching his reddened cheek, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and fury. Before he could retaliate or utter a single word of defense, Judge Davis slammed her gavel down with thunderous finality. She had seen enough of their pathetic self-serving circus. She ordered the court bailiffs to immediately remove both the plaintiff and his wife from her chamber for gross contempt and causing a physical disturbance. Two heavily armed federal deputies instantly converged on the warring couple. They grabbed Tyson by the arms, dragging him backward as he weakly tried to shake off their iron grip. Another deputy firmly escorted Courtney, who was now screaming hysterically about her ruined life, her seized bank accounts, and her demand for diplomatic immunity. Their designer shoes scuffed awkwardly against the polished hardwood floor as they were forcefully marched down the center aisle. The heavy oak doors swung open and they were unceremoniously shoved out into the public corridor. The doors slammed shut behind them abruptly, cutting off Courtney's frantic shrieks. The absolute silence that returned to the courtroom was incredibly profound. The legal battle was officially over. Judge Davis looked down at Jonathan Pierce and me, offering a curt, professional nod of acknowledgement before adjourning the emergency hearing. I stood up, buttoned my charcoal suit jacket, and calmly gathered my leather portfolio. The entire fraudulent empire my son had tried to build on my back was officially dead buried under a mountain of federal injunctions. I walked out of the courthouse alongside Jonathan Pierce, stepping through the massive glass double doors and into the blinding glare of the late afternoon sun. The sprawling concrete parking lot stretched out before us, a vast, unforgiving expanse of gray asphalt baking under the brutal heat. It was the perfect physical manifestation of the stark, inescapable reality Tyson and Courtney now faced. There were no dim, flattering country club lights out here. There were no velvet ropes or exclusive VIP lounges to hide behind. The majestic marble columns of the federal building stood tall at our backs, representing the crushing weight of the legal system that had just systematically dismantled their entire fraudulent existence. Down at the bottom of the grand stone staircase, standing near a row of empty visitor parking spaces, were Tyson and Courtney. The deputies had dumped them outside like common trespassers. Courtney was already marching away toward the busy street, furiously tapping her inactive cell phone, desperately trying to flag down a premium rideshare she could no longer afford. She did not look back at her husband even once. She simply abandoned him on the scorching pavement. Tyson stood entirely alone at the base of the courthouse steps. His custom midnight blue suit was violently wrinkled, his expensive tie completely gone and his hair plastered to his forehead with nervous sweat. He looked up and saw me descending the wide marble staircase. For a brief second, his instinctual vanity tried to take over. He attempted to straighten his posture, trying to summon the arrogant tech visionary he had pretended to be for the last 5 years. But the crushing, inescapable weight of his reality broke him instantly. The federal fraud charges, the frozen accounts, the seized assets, and the violent shadow syndicate hunting him down completely shattered his manufactured pride. As I reached the bottom step, Tyson did something I never thought I would witness in my entire life. He lunged forward and dropped heavily onto his knees right on the blistering concrete. He scrambled across the rough pavement, tearing the expensive fabric of his trousers, and aggressively wrapped his arms around my legs. He buried his face against the sharp crease of my $5,000 trousers, sobbing with a loud, pathetic desperation that echoed across the empty parking lot. "Dad," he wailed, his voice cracking into a high-pitched, hysterical shriek. "Dad, please. You have to stop this. You have to call off the lawyers. You have to give me the company back. I am so sorry. I was stressed. I was just trying to protect my family. You cannot let them send me to federal prison. You cannot let Romanov's guys find me. I am your son. I am your flesh and blood. You held me when I was a baby. You cannot do this to your own child." "Dad, think about Mom," Tyson sobbed, weaponizing the memory of the woman who had begged me to test him. "Mom would not want this. She would want us to be a family. I can change. I swear to you I can change. Just unlock the trust fund. Just pay off the syndicate and tell the federal judge it was all a big misunderstanding. I will work for you. I will mop the floors of your logistics centers. Just do not leave me out here with nothing." He was completely frantic, his manicured fingernails digging desperately into my calves. His entire plea was a masterclass in selfish manipulation. He did not care about Lorraine. He did not care about the pain he caused me. He was simply throwing every emotional lever he could reach, hoping one of them would trigger the blind, unconditional parental love he had exploited his entire adult life. I felt the hot, pathetic tears soaking into the fabric of my suit, but my heart remained completely stone cold. I looked down at the top of his head, feeling absolutely nothing but a profound clinical disgust. He was begging for mercy from a man he had actively tried to destroy less than 48 hours ago. I did not kick him away. I did not raise my voice or shout about the immense betrayal he had orchestrated. I simply stood perfectly still in the harsh sunlight, looking down at his trembling, pathetic form. The stark contrast between this exact moment and the events of his daughter's Sweet 16 party was absolute poetry. Just 2 days ago, I was the one standing in the dark, humiliating shadows of a service hallway wearing a faded thrift store jacket and rusted work boots. Tyson had been the one looking down at me wearing his impeccable tuxedo, entirely convinced he was a god among men. He had forcefully grabbed my shoulder, looked me dead in the eye, and told me I was a filthy embarrassment to his high society friends. He had demanded I leave through the back door like a common stray dog. Now the roles were violently and permanently reversed. I was the billionaire titan standing in the sunlight, and he was the filthy, weeping beggar groveling on the hot concrete at my feet. I slowly reached my right hand into the inner pocket of my tailored charcoal suit. My fingers brushed against my platinum money clip, the cold metal a sharp contrast to the heated desperation radiating from the man clinging to my legs. I pulled it out and deliberately peeled off a single crisp $100 bill. It was the exact same denomination he had so aggressively shoved into my chest at the country club when he tried to buy my absence. I looked down at the son who had sold his soul for a fleeting taste of synthetic luxury. I watched his bloodshot eyes track the movement of the money, a sick, instinctual glimmer of greedy hope flashing across his face even in his darkest moment. I held the green banknote out, letting it flutter slightly in the warm afternoon breeze directly above his tear-stained face, preparing to deliver the absolute final adjustment to his corrupted reality. I held the crisp $100 bill between my index finger and thumb, watching Tyson's desperate bloodshot eyes track its every flutter in the warm afternoon breeze. This single piece of paper was the exact quantifiable value he had placed on my dignity just 48 hours ago. It was the absolute maximum he was willing to spend to rid himself of the father who had built the very foundation he stood upon. I did not crush the bill in my fist. I did not throw it aggressively in his face or scream about the magnitude of his betrayal. I simply opened my fingers and let gravity do the heavy lifting. The green banknote drifted lazily through the air, completely unaffected by the suffocating, frantic desperation radiating from the man kneeling on the concrete. It landed softly on the blistering asphalt, resting just an inch away from his scraped, trembling hands. Tyson stared down at the money, his breath catching in his throat as the profound, crushing symbolism of the moment finally penetrated his shattered ego. He reached for it instinctively, his fingers hesitating, his manufactured pride completely warring with his absolute sudden poverty. I looked down at him, feeling no anger, no sorrow, and absolutely no paternal pity. My voice was calm, mechanical, and devastatingly quiet when I finally spoke. "Take it." I said, my words cutting through the heavy, humid air like shards of broken glass. "That is all you are worth to me now. That is the exact amount you paid to permanently sever your bloodline. Take the cab fare. Tyson, and do not ever embarrass me again." Before Tyson could even formulate a pathetic response or launch into another hysterical plea for mercy, the deep, powerful hum of a massive V12 engine vibrated through the courthouse parking lot. A pristine, midnight black Rolls-Royce Phantom glided effortlessly onto the sun-baked asphalt, its heavily tinted windows and flawless chrome accents reflecting the harsh daylight perfectly. It pulled up smoothly, completely silent, except for the crunch of tires on the pavement stopping exactly 3 feet away from where Tyson was groveling in the dirt. A uniformed driver immediately stepped out, moving with crisp military precision, and opened the heavy rear passenger door for me. The sheer, unapologetic luxury of the vehicle stood in absolute staggering contrast to the pathetic, broken man weeping on the concrete. Tyson had spent his entire adult life desperately chasing this exact level of elite, untouchable wealth. He had leased cars he could not afford and borrowed money from violent criminals just to project the illusion of power that was currently idling quietly right in front of his face. Now he was forced to watch as the ultimate symbol of corporate supremacy arrived to collect the father he had arrogantly shoved out the back door. I stepped away from the weeping shell of my son and moved toward the open door of the Phantom. I did not look back. I slid into the expansive climate-controlled rear cabin, sinking into the plush, hand-stitched leather seating. Sitting quietly on the opposite side of the spacious luxury interior was Aaliyah. My 16-year-old granddaughter looked completely untouched by the apocalyptic legal warfare that had just decimated her parents' lives. Dominic had safely transported her from the diner, and she had been waiting patiently in the secure comfort of my vehicle while I systematically dismantled the fraudulent empire inside the courthouse. She looked out the tinted window, her dark eyes resting heavily on the pathetic sight of her father, kneeling on the burning asphalt clutching a single $100 bill. There were no tears on her face. There was no hysterical screaming or desperate pleas to roll down the window and save him. She had read the text messages. She had endured the suffocating vanity of her parents for years, and she had personally witnessed them lock her in a room to extort a dead man. She knew exactly what kind of monsters they truly were, and she felt absolutely no obligation to sink with their ship. She turned away from the thick glass window, looking directly at me. Her expression was calm, resolute, and remarkably mature for her age. She reached across the wide leather armrest and gently placed her hand over mine. In that simple, quiet gesture, she made her absolute final choice. She was choosing the grandfather who built things with his own hands over the parents who destroyed everything they touched. I gave her hand a reassuring squeeze, silently confirming that she was safe, secure, and completely insulated from the fallout. The uniformed driver closed the heavy door with a solid, airtight thud, instantly cutting off the ambient noise of the parking lot and Tyson's muffled, desperate sobbing. The driver returned to the front seat, put the massive vehicle into gear, and smoothly accelerated. I looked through the rearview mirror as the Rolls-Royce glided toward the main exit of the federal courthouse. Tyson remained on his knees in the empty parking lot, a tiny, insignificant speck against the sprawling gray concrete. He was entirely alone. He had no company, no wife, no daughter, no money, and no future. He was left with absolutely nothing but the scorching heat, the impending federal indictments, and the violent debt he owed to men who did not negotiate or accept apologies. He had finally achieved the exact level of isolation he deserved. We pulled out onto the main boulevard, merging seamlessly into the flow of city traffic. I looked over at Aaliyah, who was quietly opening a thick leather-bound university catalog I had placed on her seat. The war was officially over, and the toxic infection had been successfully amputated from our family tree. The silence in the cabin was not heavy or oppressive. It was the clear, refreshing silence of absolute victory and a newly restored order. 6 months passed since the heavy doors of the federal courthouse slammed shut on the fabricated lives of Tyson and Courtney. Half a year was more than enough time for the merciless gears of reality to grind their remaining delusions into fine dust. The swift, brutal adjustment I engineered had completely rewritten the trajectory of everyone involved. For Aaliyah and me, the passage of time brought a profound, absolute tranquility. We were no longer navigating a minefield of narcissistic demands or tiptoeing around fragile egos. But for the two people who had arrogantly attempted to erase me from existence, the real world proved to be an unforgiving, inescapable nightmare. The swift, glamorous divorce Courtney had aggressively demanded during the hearing never materialized. Instead, the federal financial regulators dragged her through a grueling, agonizingly public investigation, seizing every designer handbag and auctioning off her jewelry to pay for the massive civil penalties. She was unceremoniously dumped from her elite social circles faster than she could blink, her name becoming utterly toxic in the high society she once ruled. As for Tyson, the ultimate self-proclaimed tech visionary, his highly anticipated reckoning arrived with devastating precision. The Shadow Syndicate did not care about his tears, and the federal prosecutors did not care about his excuses. He was forced to confront the absolute bottom of the socioeconomic ladder he had spent his entire life desperately trying to avoid. The consequences of their supreme arrogance were not just legal or financial. They were painfully, humiliatingly physical. Their transition from penthouse luxury to the gritty, unforgiving pavement of the real world was absolute and irreversible. And as I sat on the expansive balcony of my penthouse looking over the sprawling logistics empire I had successfully protected, I finally received the comprehensive surveillance reports detailing exactly how the mighty had fallen. The universe had a very specific way of balancing the scales, and their new daily routines were the ultimate proof of a perfect, uncompromising justice. 6 months is more than enough time for the dust of total destruction to settle into the foundation of a brand new reality. For Aaliyah, that reality was finally free of the suffocating toxic vanity that had defined her entire childhood. She officially moved into one of the expansive guest suites in my penthouse, bringing only the few personal items that actually mattered to her. I immediately established a heavily fortified educational scholarship fund exclusively in her name. The Vanguard Educational Trust was legally structured with airtight clauses, ensuring that neither Tyson nor Courtney could ever petition to access the principal or act as administrative proxies under any circumstances. It was fully funded to cover her undergraduate and graduate tuition at any Ivy League institution she chose to attend, alongside a modest, heavily monitored living stipend. Without the constant agonizing pressure of her mother's social climbing and her father's manic financial schemes, Aaliyah absolutely thrived. Her grades skyrocketed. She spent her weekends volunteering at local community centers, actively choosing to ground herself in the real world rather than hide behind the velvet ropes of an exclusive country club. She still came down to the secure underground parking garage with me on Sunday mornings, rolling up her sleeves and getting engine grease on her hands as we meticulously restored the old 1998 Ford pickup together. She was the absolute best part of Lorraine living on in the present. She was resilient, brilliant, and completely untainted by the grotesque greed that had consumed her parents. She had looked directly into the abyss of absolute wealth and consciously chose character over currency. Courtney, however, experienced an entirely different kind of brutal education. Stripped of her luxury vehicles, her designer wardrobe, and the illicit offshore accounts she had desperately tried to secure, she was unceremoniously forced to face the harsh reality of the working class she had so openly despised. With a massive federal fraud investigation lingering over her head and a completely ruined public reputation in the city's high society, the only employment she could secure was a grueling minimum wage position as a waitress at a high-volume, low-tier diner on the outskirts of town. The poetic justice of her new life was absolutely staggering. The woman who once publicly berated service staff, complained about the vintage of imported wines, and mocked my blue-collar background was now forced to wear a cheap polyester uniform that constantly smelled of stale fryer grease. She spent 8 hours a day on her swollen feet, forced to paste on a submissive, polite smile while enduring the exact same condescending, arrogant behavior from rude customers that she used to gleefully inflict upon others. Every dropped tip, every spilled cup of coffee, and every dismissive snap of a customer's fingers was a daily excruciating reminder of the elite kingdom she had permanently lost through her own vicious greed. As for my son, the brilliant tech visionary and self-proclaimed elite executive, his daily reality was far more punishing. Tyson narrowly avoided a lengthy federal prison sentence by pleading guilty to multiple counts of wire fraud and forgery, heavily cooperating with authorities to dismantle the shadow syndicate he had foolishly entangled himself with. But avoiding a steel jail cell did not mean he avoided a life sentence of grueling misery. The federal judge slapped him with hundreds of thousands of dollars in mandatory restitution and punitive court fees. With his reputation absolutely annihilated, his assets liquidated by Vanguard Holdings, and a felony record permanently attached to his name, the corporate world slammed its doors completely shut in his face. No venture capitalist would even look in his direction. No tech firm would hire him for an entry-level coding job. Tyson was forced into the only sector that would accept a convicted fraudster desperate for immediate cash flow. He took a job working the grueling overnight shift as a manual stocker in a massive, non-air-conditioned retail distribution warehouse. The irony was heavy, absolute, and undeniably perfect. The man who had sneered at my calloused hands, who had literally pushed me out the back door of a country club because I looked like a filthy manual laborer, was now breaking his own back, moving heavy cardboard boxes for minimum wage. He spent his nights hauling pallets of cheap consumer goods, sweating through cheap industrial uniforms, completely stripped of his tailor-made suits and his stolen luxury watches. His body ached constantly. His hands developed thick, ugly calluses, and his arrogant ego was violently crushed under the sheer physical weight of legitimate blue-collar labor. He lived in a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment in a neighborhood far worse than the one he had relentlessly mocked me for living in. A significant portion of his meager weekly paycheck was automatically garnished by the state to pay down his massive legal debts, leaving him with barely enough cash to afford instant noodles and bus fare. Dominic periodically sent me updated surveillance photographs of Tyson waiting at the public transit stop at 4 in the morning, his shoulders permanently slumped, his face hollow and gray. There was absolutely no trace of the arrogant, fast-talking startup founder left in those images. The fake billionaire had been entirely erased, replaced by an exhausted, terrified man who finally understood the crushing, inescapable reality of hard work. He had spent his entire adult life running away from his working-class roots, terrified of the dirt and the grind. Now he was permanently buried in it. He was finally paying the true honest price for his existence, one agonizing overnight shift at a time. I sat alone on the expansive terrace of my penthouse, a crystal glass of aged bourbon resting on the small table beside me. The sprawling city below was a brilliant sea of electric lights, a vast pulsing network of commerce and ambition that I had successfully navigated and conquered over 4 grueling decades. The cool evening breeze swept across the balcony, completely untouched by the noise and chaos of the streets far below. I looked out over the empire Lorraine and I had built together from nothing but scrap metal, late nights, and absolute determination. There was no grand, triumphant joy pumping through my veins. I did not raise my glass in a toast to my own ruthless cunning or celebrate the total destruction of my son's life. You do not celebrate amputating a diseased limb to save the healthy body. You merely accept the grim necessity of the procedure and learn to live with the remaining scars. I had done exactly what I promised Lorraine I would do. I had tested his soul, found it completely rotten, and systematically neutralized his ability to spread that poison to the next generation. The Vanguard Legacy Trust remained impenetrable. Aaliyah was safe and thriving, and the men and women who had attempted to steal my dignity were locked in the inescapable prisons of their own making. The massive ledger of my life was finally perfectly balanced. I took a slow sip of the bourbon, letting the smooth warmth settle deeply in my chest. The long, exhausting war was officially over. The loud, arrogant noise of entitlement manipulation and profound betrayal had been permanently silenced. There was absolutely nothing left to fight for and absolutely nothing left to prove to anyone. I leaned back into my chair, closing my eyes as the city hummed quietly beneath me, finally embracing the absolute unbreakable peace of the final silence. If there is one final lesson I take away from this entire ordeal, it is that wealth does not change who you are. It merely magnifies what is already inside your heart. Tyson and Courtney believed that their leased luxury cars and country club memberships elevated them above basic human decency. They thought money gave them the right to discard the people who laid the very foundation of their lives. But artificial status is a fragile shield. When you build your entire identity on the perception of others and the exploitation of your family, your inevitable collapse will leave you with absolutely nothing to fall back on. True respect must be earned through character, never bought with a stolen credit card. If you enjoyed this story of absolute justice and karma, please share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel for more.